2021 meeting of the Ann Arbor Planning Commission. This meeting is being held electronically to protect public health and safety due to the COVID-19 virus and to comply with orders issued by the governor, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and/or the Washtenaw County Health Department. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 877-853-5247 or one of the other numbers that's published on the agenda. The meeting ID that you'll enter is 991-5161-1348. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website. It's on the broadcast of this meeting, which is on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at a2gov.org/watchctn. And if you want to watch it that way, you select the government channel. Item number 2 is the roll call. Mr. Leonard, could you help us with that, please?
Absolutely. Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Gibb-Randall.
Here.
Commissioner Sauvé. Commissioner Abrams. Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Here.
Commissioner Dish.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
We have a quorum. We have 7 members present. Just a note for a reminder for the Planning Commission and petitioners. 6 affirmative votes are required to advance a petition with an affirmative.
Thank you very much. Item 3 is introductions. Doesn't look like we have any. All right, then we're on item 4, which is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Gibb-Randall. Is there any discussion of the motion? Any changes? All right, all in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. I think I heard everyone. The motion carries. Item number 5 is the minutes of the previous agenda. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the January 5th, 2021 meeting? Moved by Commissioner Dish, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. Is there any discussion or corrections? All in favor of the minutes as drafted, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. I saw all hands. So the motion carries. We're already up to item 6, which is reports from city administration, city council, the planning manager, planning commission officers and committees, and written communications. Council Member Dish, do you have any report for us?
Yes, I do. It was a busy night on council on Tuesday. Went long into the morning. But the great news is that we had final passage of the floodplain ordinance, which was just on the consent agenda, just like, and final passage of the EV ordinance, which is such great news. And we passed I think this is of interest to planning, at least adjacently. We passed a resolution to rescind the requirement that road reconfigurations come before council. So that might be, I guess you don't really do those, or we don't do those, but we also passed those number of amendments to the UDC, which mostly look like corrections where it had not been updated or properly updated to reflect previously adopted ordinances. But then there were a couple of new additions, which I think came out of planning, which was the right-of-way dedications for public sidewalks can be counted towards calculation of FAR. Restrictions on the use of fiber cement board, which I'm assuming Alex himself authored that one. And the provision that we passed a few weeks ago regarding granting temporary certificates of occupancy when there's just something like bike racks that need to be finished or something like that. And there is a request from council that we are already set up to do, which is council would like PC to confirm its appointment to the Council of Commons. And I believe that's all.
Very good. Yep, that is the last item on our agenda this evening. So we'll be looking at assignments to those committees and other councils. Mr. Leonard, do you have any report for us?
Yeah, just to tack on to Commissioner Dish's report, to clarify that floodplain ordinance was actually, it's called summary publication. It's sort of a formality after the previous adoption of the ordinance that allows the ordinance to be adopted in summary rather than thousands upon thousands of words. So it references that action. The floodplain ordinance was adopted previously. You'll see a similar convention happen with the recently adopted EV ordinance and the Charlie batch of UDC amendments that Commissioner Dish just referenced. Due to some scheduling snafus, i.e. mistakes on me and my team's part, we did have to postpone action on the rezoning of 2111 Packard and Lockwood on Ellsworth. Those were just to let the rezoning and site plans be considered at the same agenda on February 1st. And then just a couple quick updates. We, for the Ordinance Revisions Committee meeting later or next week, anticipate diving a little bit further into the draft transit zoning district and starting conversation about site plan review thresholds that have been identified. And then as a reminder, we will be working towards our February working session as an opportunity for public engagement on proposed changes to the ADU ordinance and proposed transit zoning. So more to come on that, but just a reminder that that'll be a little bit different format meeting than you're probably typically accustomed to. And that's all.
Very good, thank you. Do any other commissioner officers or committee liaisons have anything to report out? I will just note for those of you who didn't call into the working session last week that we had one kind of meeting for a PUD, but there was a portion that was recorded. There was a presentation by 2 faculty members at University of Michigan who told us about some research that they've been conducting on racially exclusionary deed restrictions in the city of Ann Arbor. That we did record and it's now available online. It from kind of a YouTube thing. Mr. Leonard, that's if you go to the Planning Commission website, is that right? Oh, you are on mute, sorry.
Dollar in the jar. It's not linked on our website yet, but it will be by the end of the week. We are also anticipating to post a few other resources that were mentioned, including Washtenaw County's Opportunity Index map. So I'll send a follow-up to Planning Commission once those links are available, and we could also send out a planning update gov delivery notice as well. But as mentioned, it is available on YouTube. If anybody is interested in that, prior to that, feel free to email us at planning@a2gov.org. We can get you that link out quickly.
Excellent. And I would just note, we'll talk about this a little bit later because it's part of our work plan for this year to be looking at kind of the history of zoning in the city, single family zoning in the city, and its kind of intersection with racial equity and 820 goals. That's one of the educational sessions. One of the things that we'll talk about later on as we're forming those subcommittees is a group to help kind of coordinate those. And so this is part of that. And I thought our kind of discussion at the end about what future steps might be or other things that we could look at will help inform some of that as well. Commissioner Gibb Randall, sorry.
I just have a quick question for Mr. Leonard. Did I hear you say that the map would be a separate thing?
Yeah, there's
That's great. Yeah.
There was some discussion about some overlaying, but at this time, we haven't taken any of those steps. That research is still in the hands of those researchers at the University of Michigan. However, the Washtenaw County Office of Community and Economic Development has put together what's called Opportunity Washtenaw. That's an existing resource that you can explore a lot of different aspects of demographics, income, poverty, health, a lot of different indices, and see how there are differentials across the county. I think my intention of posting that link is that while I think that the county is in the process of doing some updates to that, which may be released soon. Even in the meantime, that's a great resource to for people to explore some of the types of overlays that was discussed in the working session.
I would also encourage you to ask for, as part of the PowerPoint thing, the map that they showed was kind of difficult and a little fuzzy to read because it was all scrunched up and on a small screen. If there's any way that you could, and I know it's in process and all that kind of thing, but it would be great if we could get that as a separate file so that people could look at it more closely, because I just noticed I couldn't read any of the legend very easily and stuff like that. So that would be great if you could ask them for that as a separate piece so that we could, because I think people are curious and would like to be able to zoom in more easily than it as kind of part of a presentation that's in the middle of a, of a video. So
yeah, I'll follow up and ask. I know that that's sort of the next phase, is that finding a way to host that information so it is accessible.
Yeah.
But I'll ask for the best we can get in the interim.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No other updates from commissioner officers. Oh, yes, Commissioner Goodberandel.
I would just say just one tidbit that came out of the DDA partners meeting that might be interesting for this group is that the AAATA is obviously still not operating at full capacity, but that they hope to be by August. So just in terms of us kind of understanding that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily make a difference for site plans, but I think as we're making a lot of decisions, I think, around 820 and all kinds of things around transportation, that it's just helpful for us to understand kind of where they are with things and the kind of toll that it's taken on them. And that the air ride is still down too, in terms of getting to the airport. And that they had a really wonderful grant that they got that was looking at, or that was a bus that was going back and forth to Detroit, and that they're hoping that that may start up in not too long. That also got shut down. So just so you all know, those are some of the things that are going on that might apply to what we're thinking about.
Thank you. Light at the end of the tunnel as vaccines come out. All right, moving on to item number 7. This is audience participation. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about an issue that's not listed as a public hearing on this agenda. So the public hearings that we have tonight are for the 300 South Maple project, and we also have a public hearing for the planned project site plan modifications. So if you have any other matters that you'd like to address Planning Commission on, you can call 877-853-5247 and then enter meeting ID 991-5161-1348. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand, calling upon you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. You raise your hand by pressing *9 on your telephone. You'll hear an automated announcement when the host has allowed you to speak. Once you're kind of allowed to speak, you may need to press *6 on your phone to unmute it. But please move to a quiet area and mute any background sound so that we can hear you clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. So if any of the callers on the line want to speak on an issue that is not a public hearing tonight, you can press *9 right now to raise your hand.
Caller with the phone number ending with 534. Caller with the phone number ending with 534. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Good evening. This is Tom Stollberg. I am excited about an item that's at a public hearing later on, but I won't talk about that. That's the planned project modification replacement. Been following that for quite some time. I'm also excited about our floodplain ordinance moving forward, about the ED ordinance, and that you'll be discussing transit supported development pretty soon. Also in the UDC amendments that Council just approved. I'm happy that the one item in particular about the ADUs being extended into the R2A zoning category. Been watching that, and I'm glad to hear that happened. I also hear that you're going to be talking about ADUs again in the near future, And I want to remind everybody about how problematic the last process was, including starting with what was really an unofficial process by a DDA member acting on her private behalf that she did end up admitting to. That ended up becoming a report, that ended up becoming officially adopted by council, that ended up being the major key that some ordinance revisions that were overreaching were proposed. And despite some warnings from some citizens that were paying attention, it was brought to council to effectively eliminate single family zoning for 19,000 households, with probably 99.9% of those 19,000 households being completely unaware of what was about to happen to them, that their neighbors would have a by right ability to build an 800 square foot detached unit in the rear setback of single family zoned residents. So that's 19,000 people who did not know, residences, so not just people. So that was really problematic, and council wisely turned that down. What are we, about 2 years ago now, spring, that happened. So please keep that in mind, as I personally would like to see some expansions of ADUs, but if we don't do it right, it's going to get killed like the last one did, and that was appropriate. So I want you to take that into consideration, and that also segues into your appointments to committees later on in the agenda. And
30 more seconds.
Single family zoning committee. I know a lot of people are going to be paying attention to that, so I hope that's something that you keep the public well aware of as you have discussions with that. And also the Council of Commons appointments. There's going to be a lot of public eyes on that one as well. So I look forward to seeing your choice. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else on, any other callers on the line right now, so I will go ahead and close this opportunity for public what do we call it now? I'm blanking. Audience participation. Sorry, public comment, audience participation. There's another opportunity at the end of the meeting, in addition to the public hearings on the agenda tonight. So we'll move on to item 8, which is public hearings for the next business meeting.
We have one new public hearing scheduled for the next business meeting on February 2nd. This is 201 Scioto Church Road, annexation and zoning for city council approval. It's a request to annex a 1.18 acre parcel for Pittsfield Township and zone it R2A zoning. No construction is proposed at this time, and it will be coming with a recommended waiver of an area plan requirement to the Planning Commission.
Very good, thank you. All right, we are on to our unfinished business. 9A is the Lewis Jewelers Retail Plaza site plan for city council approval and special exception use. The special exception use is for Planning Commission approval. As is our practice on Planning Commission, we'll give the petitioner up to 10 minutes to present the project to us. Then we'll turn it over to Mr. Kowalski for a staff report. And then we'll open the public hearing, and after that, we'll have discussion among the planning commissioners.
Before we get started, of the petitioners, would somebody like to share a presentation?
Yes, I will.
Okay. Let me make that arrangement for you.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
All right, let's see if we can share this. Can you see that?
We can.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Rob Kerr. I'm an architect with Measure Group Architects. We saw you guys a month ago, I guess, and have done some updates. And I think we're pretty excited to see you and move this on to the next stage. So as you remember before, it's 300 South Maple. It was a building that has been vacant for quite some time. That building was the Quarter Bistro. It's on 1.9 acres, C3 zoning, 9,300 square feet was the existing size, and property slopes from west to southwest or southeast. And there is a common parking agreement between Westgate Shopping Plaza and our property. All right. This is our project, our proposed project on top of the Bistro area relative to the rest of the shopping center, which you saw before, and our new site plan. Nothing has changed with the buildings. Nothing has changed on the north side of the property. As you recall, we're creating a new access way on the north side, handicap accessible to the rest of the shopping center. Suite 1 will be Lewis Jewelers. Suite 2 has 4 tenants, which we're working on right now for tenants. And Suite 3 has 2 tenants. And I'll talk about the changes now. What we changed on the property was—
Excuse me, I just want to jump in for 1 minute. If you, it seemed from what you were saying that you might think we were looking at a site plan, but the slides still seem to be on the first slide.
Oh,
Just so you know.
it says I'm sharing the screen and I'm on screen. Let me see. Let me go back to the first one. You see the first one?
Yeah, it hasn't changed. You know what? I actually think you're not in like presentation mode right now. It's not the full screen, so maybe it's showing a different monitor. Sorry, I didn't say that earlier. It's big, but.
And it's nothing to do with you guys controlling it, not me.
I don't think
Okay.
so.
Okay.
And it's not just me being, you guys are also still seeing the title slide. Okay.
How's that?
Yeah.
All right. Now let's try one more. Is that better? Didn't
No.
change.
Didn't change.
Frozen to me. I don't see his mouse moving.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and try it again.
Sounds good.
Okay. Can you see that again?
It's loading, at least according to my screen. I'm not seeing anything. It's saying you've started screen sharing. Third time's the charm, though.
Yes, 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 yes. Let me, sorry about this, guys.
This is why we do the apology up front. Like, and we are so, you know,
Well, you can
no
see
matter how
me
much you use Zoom,
now.
you know,
can
things
see
go.
me, right?
Matt, do you have the presentation handy? So if it doesn't work there, we can have Matt advance it, and you can just sort of give him audio clues to advance the slides.
Hey, Matt. Do you want to?
Sure. Give me 1 second. I got to switch over. And here we go. Wait, let me. Okay. Speaker. Does that work?
Yeah.
See in slide 1?
Oh, okay. Let's see if I can. Now, is it the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I think we kind of got through this, Rob. Maybe I'll get to the, and then you.
I'll go to the next slide, please.
Okay. All right.
And you can you see my cursor or not?
No.
Oh, okay. So, I was about to explain to everybody that on the north side of the property, there is a handicap accessible walkway.
Can everybody see my mouse? It's in this area right here. Okay.
Yeah. And then, so everything on the north side of the building is the same as you saw before. When we come down to the south side of the building, we took off the drive-through. And while we did that, we turned the 2 tenants so that they're facing where the drive-through was, if you will, so that there's more of a connection within the center. There's still the ability to have glass, as you'll see in the elevations on the east side, but on the south side now we're expecting to have access. We also talked about, I don't know if you can see in that first tree that's there in the corner, there's a staircase that's there. we talked about having accessibility from that corner of the property up onto the property. And the changes there are so significant that a ramp, we chose to do a stair there, but we still have a handrail, steps, and the opportunity for people to traverse through the property along a new sidewalk where it used to be, what we were proposing before was the drive-through and then into the property. We also added, as you'll see, Matt, just below the, there, we added a lot more greenery, if you will, to make that transition between the sidewalk and the roadways, kind of give you a little space there. So we removed the driveway. We turned the two suites, or the two tenants on suite 3. We added landscape on the south side there. We provided access on the south with the handrails and a stair. And the last thing we talked about when we were together, we talked about the dumpster enclosure. We went through gyrations. I wish I could show my plan because I had one more slide that we created that shows all the restrictions on the site. There's a 40-foot easement that runs basically from the face of Suite 3 all the way down the property line. So bringing the dumpster on that side of the street is impossible. There's another one on the strip on the west side. There's an easement there. And then in the center area where we have storm detention, and so we can't plant that on top of it. Additionally, as I noticed in the report, the planning report, it's been, you guys checked to see if, solid waste was okay with it. And of course they are. And I wanted to add to that is that it's 27 feet from the corner, the closest corner to the patio, it's 27 feet. So it's not right up on it. We'd like it, we would have loved to have it a little differently, but it's still 27 feet away. Go to the next. That's gotten kind of messed up. All right.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's.
Next one.
Wait, there we go.
So this elevation didn't change. Just go to the next one, Matt. As you can see now, just in this quick rendering, we now have more sidewalk in front of suite number 3. It's a 2-way drive with parallel parking, and we have more green space. So one more, yeah, that's it. So we hope that you like it and like it a lot, and we can get this passed today. It would be a lot of fun, and we appreciate everybody's help and attention.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kowalski.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. I don't really have a lot to add in summary. Again, Mr. Kerr had kind of summed up the changes. Those were the main issues that we had flagged from the last Planning Commission meeting in January. Obviously, the drive-through was probably the top issue. And then also the sidewalk connections, and then the solid waste enclosure. We did, in addition to the petitioner running through numerous iterations of how to fit that on the site. I mean, in my conversations with the solid waste coordinator too, and looking at those easements, it truly is the only place on the site that you could really put the dumpster. And in addition, I had requested, and the petitioner had reached out to Westgate, because I thought, if they I believe one commissioner had mentioned if there was a concern there, but Westgate did also submit a letter saying that, yeah, they're fine with that dumpster location where it is. And really, again, with that, so there is no special exception use, that has been withdrawn. So obviously, because there's no need for it. So at this time, it's a standard site plan review. The transportation coordinator, again, who had concerns obviously with the drive-through previously, has now recommended her approval of it, and without the drive-through, that, as she had said, I believe it's in my staff notes as well, that removed the vast majority of her concern with the project. So again, at this time, staff is recommending approval, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll open the public hearing for this item. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed Lewis Jewelers retail site retail plaza site plan for city council approval. Public comment may be made by calling 877-853-5247 and then entering meeting ID 991-5161-1348. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one, calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. You digitally raise your hand on your phone by pressing *9. You'll hear an automated announcement once the host is allowing you to speak. Please make sure you've muted any background sound and moved to a quiet area. And please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Again, if you're on the line and interested to speak at this public hearing, you can press *9 to raise your hand. I know sometimes there's a delay, but I also don't see a rush.
I don't see any indication.
All right, very good. Then we will close this the public hearing, and I will read the motion. Because a special exception use has been withdrawn, we only have one motion before us, and that is: the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Lewis Jewelers Retail Plaza site plan, subject to obtaining the required off-street private storm sewer easement and the off-site private storm sewer easement and the off-site public water main easement prior to the issuance of any building permit. Moved by Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. We are in discussion. Commissioner Gibb-Randall.
First of all, thank you, design team and the owner, for making all the changes that you did, for listening to us and to being so responsive to them. It's always really nice to be able to see that, and you all seem to do that in a really thorough way. So I personally really appreciate that. I only had 2 small things. One was that if we could pull up the site plan, one of the bike hoops in kind of a funny spot. It's in one of the elevated areas where there's a bunch of stairs. And I'm just wondering how, so down in the lower right corner, I'm not sure who's controlling this. So it's on the front side of the, yeah, Matt, so it's on the front side of the building. Okay, and you see the little set of stairs going up. To the left is a bike hoop. And there's just stairs getting to it. And I'm just wondering kind of, I bike a lot and I would not look for it there if I were a biker. And so I'm just wondering if that's something that could be potentially, or first of all, if there's a reason for it that I don't know. And number 2, if it's kind of like, well, it just kind of tucked in there, and, if there is some flexibility, maybe that's something that could potentially be shifted between now and city council. So that's one question. And then the other question was about trees, but why don't you answer the bike hoop question first?
I'll answer for that. So we located it there because we had expected that somebody from possibly the Lewis Jewelers would ride their bike to the facility, but it can be placed, with the others if that's preferred.
I think what I would just say is that it would be great because I'd be biking along Stadium and I'd come in. And so something that feels visible from where you're turning in from the road. Mm-hmm. So if there's space somewhere along the walk, if there's extra space somewhere that you can just kind of eyeball it when you're biking in. Yep. Because I think given that other area is elevated and has stairs, it's not very intuitive that you would look for a bike hoop there.
Okay.
So again, that is the last thing I would want to hold this project up over. But if it's something that it could be easily accommodated in kind of thinking through another place that makes sense and that is not a big deal for you all to move around, I think that could be an improvement for the design in terms of those of us who bike around town and use bikes as a transportation.
How about we work with Matt on that?
That's great. Yeah, I'm sure you all will come up with something that's logical.
Thank you.
And then the other piece is that in your in your rendering, I noticed that I totally get the dumpster thing. I'm grateful you all explored it. I understand all the restrictions and there's all the turning radius and all that sort of thing you have to work around. In the site plan, I noticed that there were a couple of evergreen trees that were blocking the view from the back patio, which is great. But in the rendering, I didn't see them and I saw something else. And I'm just wondering I'm assuming that the kind of black and white plans are the ones that I should be looking at as the kind of main thing. And that it was probably just like, where you're plopping down the trees with your rendering software. And then I should just go with whatever was on the actual landscape plan.
Yes.
Okay.
The landscape plan rules.
Okay, so then that's fine. I just wanted to kind of confirm that because I saw it was inconsistent between the two, and I think it makes sense to have there be evergreens there.
Right.
So anyway, I just want to clarify that. Yeah, thank you for all your changes here. That's all I have.
Thanks for your help.
Any other planning commissioners have questions or comments? Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
So on that same point, and I also really appreciate all of the work you guys did, especially I think I was the one that kept bringing up the dumpster. So I really appreciate you guys exploring it. I think it was the rendering, like the 3D rendering that showed the evergreens, and then the plan, and I was trying to find the landscape plan that my computer's being slow, that showed 4 different trees. So actually, I'm sorry that I want extra clarification on what trees are planning on going in, because when I read the staff report, I was thinking that something to mitigate it would be evergreens. And so when you brought up that rendering, I was like, oh, that looks great. But like one of the first slides you had, I think showed like 4 trees just sort of placed on that lawn. Yeah. So the rendering we saw, and I think Commissioner Gabrandel, this is what you were saying, you liked the evergreen placement better?
Yeah, there were 2 renderings.
Right.
One, there was kind of a 3D thing, and that
Yeah.
had evergreens on it, and then one was the top-down view, and that I think had this on it. So I don't know, like.
So if the point is to have the evergreens buffer the view to the dumpster, the one that's at the top, if you will, can be moved down closer to the dumpster itself and make it more of a blocking tree, if that's what would make everybody feel better. Because the rendering does do that, it sort of blocks.
Yeah, I thought the rendering was nice, and it sort of left, the open space as lawn that people could use while sort of blocking the view. So if that's something that you could look at doing and have it match the rendering a little bit more, I think it would be a little better. But otherwise, thank you very much for all your work on this. I'm excited to see this project.
Can we also work with Matt on that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from planning commissioners? Commissioner Lee.
Just really quick question for petitioner. You guys said there was parallel parking. Is that towards the building, or is that, oh, that's on the south side? Actually, that cleared it up perfectly. Thank you. So it's just on the south side. Perfect. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. I think Mr. Leonard, we're ready for a roll call vote then.
Commissioner Milstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Gabrandel,
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Good luck at City Council.
Thank you. We'll be there, Matt. Thanks for all your help. You got me, you freed me from the dreaded
Yes.
Zoom problem.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. You're welcome.
You guys.
All right. The next item for business is 9B. This is the proposed amendment to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.30.1, the planned project site plan modifications for City Council approval. Staff is bringing this to us, so there's no petitioner presentation. Ms. DeLeo is here to present, and then we'll open the public hearing after she's finished before we discuss among Planning Commission.
Do a microphone check.
You're good?
Okay. All right. I don't know if you remember my last meeting. Thank you, Planning Commission. I am presenting to you for approval tonight some amendments to the UDC regarding plan project modifications. I know that we have some new members, so I will spend a moment with a little bit of background. Plan projects are in the UDC in section 5:30.1, and we took up this project some time ago, thinking how can we evolve them, how can we make them better, more usable, and how can we get more of what the city desires. The current plan project section is very open-ended. It has no limitations on how much flexibility can be achieved, and it has no minimums or thresholds of how much benefit. Through the work, Planning Commission did affirm that having a tool such as this is valuable and it should be kept in some form in the UDC. But as it currently sits, it was a little too nebulous, a little too mushy. So we put forth a couple drafts. We took a circuitous route to get here. And in October of last year, October 6th, 2020, staff put forth some amendments. We asked the Planning Commission to discuss them and validate them, but the attached document was not fully complete. It did not have all of the necessary additions and deletions. The concepts were there. Planning Commission did that, discussed, validated. So staff, we prepared a complete ordinance to amend. We made some minor, I shouldn't say amendments. We made some minor revisions, and I'll present those tonight. So in summary, the new paragraphs that we are offering offer the flexibility and setbacks in multifamily residential, mixed use, and non-residential special purpose districts. They offer exceptions to height limits for sustainable and affordable housing developments and parking waivers or for also sustainable and affordable housing developments. The amendments are intended to replicate the majority of the benefits that are offered and realized by the current plan project modification section, but less complicated, more straightforward, more predictable, more intuitive. They are not exact copies, but they're intended to keep the best of what we have moving forward. I will screen share for the benefit of folks. Sorry, I'm trying to open two windows at once. I will screen share for the benefit of those watching who may not have the packet in front of them. All right, has this loaded on the screen? Great, okay. So an addition is proposed to section 518.3, heading additional area height and placement standards, for adding a section entitled setback line and yard alternatives, 1, for multiple family residential zoning districts. This is pulling from the existing dimensional table and offering the exact, and just repeating what is currently offered. I have reworded it for clarity, but what it says is the normal side required setback provided in the table may be used for buildings over 50 feet in length or width or over 35 feet in height, as long as the total increased setback required by the footnote is provided and shown on the plan. And the footnote requires a few inches of additional setback for every feet or foot of building length or width over 50 and or height over 35. And so you've got an additional area that that is required. And how you can do that alternatively would be with a building of varied design, a C-shaped building, an L-shaped, where the legs of the building might meet the normal setback, but a cutout has been provided to meet the total area. We have now, this draft includes an alternative. The Planning Commission may remember for a particular project recently called Near North. You asked staff to analyze whether the project could have been approved if you time warped and in 5 years' time these were approved, Near North was provided. We found that Near North met this side setback requirement, but it also was using plan project modifications for its rear setback, and we aren't offering them. So I have a substitute paragraph for the Planning Commission's consideration that simply takes that but adds on the rear. So the substitute language would be the normal side and rear required setback provided in the table may be used for those big buildings as long as the increased side and rear setback required is provided. Examples, again, C, L, T, and U-shaped buildings. We've added this concept for mixed use, non-residential, and special zoning districts as well. We could not just take that same language and copy it or add these districts to the multifamily because they've got different things going on. There is no additional setback required for these districts, so there's nothing to flex there. So we've said here, we are now newly offering to them the minimum setbacks, front, side, or rear, may be decreased by 50% when another setback is increased by the same amount. So this is allowing the footprint and the building envelope to shift. It bulges out on one side, but it'd have to pinch in on another side to balance. The original draft in October did offer increased flexibility as well. That's been pulled out. It's hard when you increase a setback, it's almost impossible then to bulge it in a different way. Also, not sure if we want to offer that flexibility to increase a setback. We want buildings to be closer to the street. And if there is a hardship that it can't be close, that's maybe is probably the most appropriate process is a variance. And then moving on to the next section, this is as proposed in October. That we are offering an exception to the height limit when you have a sustainable or affordable housing development, and these terms are defined. They're not in this section here because they'll be added to the definitions. But when you have those kind of projects, you can increase the height limit by up to 30% when you're meeting certain conditions. One of the conditions is when you are within 300 feet of a residential district, you have to step back your building or set the whole thing back a little bit farther. And there is a similar concept is proposed for parking. No off-street vehicle parking will be required, again, for sustainable or affordable housing projects. Those are defined. Again, certain conditions, it's a site plan project, whatever amenities you're providing to obtain this no parking waiver are not the exact same ones that are being counted towards premiums if you're using premiums. You'd have to double up or put them on top of each other. Must provide any other requirement of this section of the table, meaning that bicycle parking is required. And if any parking is provided, still the EV spaces are satisfied. And then finally, the document has been fleshed out with all the required components. You can see we've have a section that adds the affordable housing component definition to the ordinance. In the table, we will be deleting the footnote and moving it to the alternative setback section. And we are deleting the entire plan project modification section. I'll go a little faster down here. We are also adding a section for non-conforming plan projects. We're actually not giving them any additional rights, but we are reiterating what the rights they already have. We will be creating some non-conforming buildings by removing the planned project section. So we just wanted to be clear about what happens to those. They can be maintained as they are. Any additions to them or modifications would go through the existing process for alteration of a non-conforming structure. And if they are redeveloped, they need to be redeveloped in accordance with the current code provisions. Again, this is not, we are not adding anything to them, but we are clarifying for user friendliness exactly what would happen. I will stop the share. Staff is recommending approval of these amendments. We think that it is still providing that tool for flexibility. We have had some staff discussions about whether some of these things are premiums that we're offering, and we don't think that they are premiums. We are not necessarily encouraging sustainable development or affordable developments with these amendments specifically. We're not offering really carrots. What we're doing is saying, if you are doing one of those projects, we recognize it's hard, and we're trying to make it a minute amount easier for you to realize the developments that you already wanted. The premium section is the section to really offer those incentives, offer more than what you could have had otherwise. But here we are just trying to keep the benefits of planned project, which offered that flexibility in design, but make it more narrowed, more focused, more specific, and just making it a little easy, recognizing that it can be hard to pull off those projects. As always, I'm here for any questions, follow-up, and I'm welcome to listen to your discussion, particularly about which substitute you'd like for the setback allowance. Brett.
Mr. Leonard.
And I just want to piggyback on that last section that City Planner DeLeo referenced. We did discuss this, and we discussed it in a couple contexts. The exercise that was used with Near North, for example, about whether or not that would be a benefit or not. We also talked about, as it was indicated, we provide that flexibility currently on sides, not on rears. And then the final aspect of that, I would just, this is not a survey of land use across the city, but I think that it's reasonable to think about side yards perhaps being more likely to share zoning categories and uses more frequently than perhaps rear property lines, particularly along corridors. And so when you think about that flexibility, for example, being added to a property along Washtenaw, where side to side, it might be, if not the exact same zone, it might be shifting from a commercial to a different type of commercial zoning. That might be distinct from a commercial property that is abutting residential property to the rear of it. Again, that's a generalization, but I just wanted to add that was a consideration that we had, and as we're presenting it, it does not include the addition of that rear yard. But since that was such a topic, I appreciate that. That was something that was discussed, and we wanted to provide that language as an alternative, but I just wanted to frame it a little bit further.
Thank you. Before we open this up, Commissioner Clark, you had your hand up earlier, and I saw you. I just wanted to make sure if there's an outstanding question before we move on.
I was just having a really hard time hearing Alexis. I was just thinking there might have been something with the audio, but I was just I wasn't sure if anybody else was having the issue or not.
It was okay for me.
I turned up the volume.
Oh.
God. So you might need to talk louder, Alexis.
It's weird. She's always yelling at me.
Well, I'm hoarse now.
I think CTN turned you up midway. I noticed that your level came up.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you just need to adjust your microphone in your settings for Zoom. I've noticed that's a thing you can do.
Great. In like, non-digital space, people would like do more hand signals so feel free to do that in this space. I appreciate you raising your hand. And since I was getting ready to call on you while Mr. Leo was talking, but then you put it down. So I was like, oh, it must have solved itself. But sorry, incorrect assumption. Okay.
But Commissioner Clark, if you, any particular question, please go ahead.
It was just that. It's okay.
I meant
right.
if it comes up.
I'm sure there will be lots of discussion on each of the elements of this. So, first though, we're going to have the public hearing. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed Unified Development Code planned project modification ordinance amendments. Public comment can be made by calling 877-853-5247 and then entering meeting ID 991-5161-1348. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand by calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. You digitally raise your hand by pressing *9. After hearing the automated message that the host is allowing you to speak, please make sure to move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. So for any callers on the line who would like to speak at this public hearing, please press *9 to raise your hand. If you'd like to speak at the public hearing about the planned project site plan modifications, please press *9. Based on the comment earlier, I kind of think that the caller that's on the line wanted to talk about this. So, Mr. Stollberg, I think that's still your number there. If you want to speak to this item, can you press *9 to raise your hand and let us know? Great. And there's Mr. Leonard's dog.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now? This is Tom Stollberg.
We can.
Hi. Sorry, I was not intending to speak, but you were begging me. I want to thank you all for doing this. I think this is a really good change, and that's all I need to say. Thanks.
Oh, great. Okay. I don't see any other callers on the line, so I'll close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the January 15, 2021 drafted amendments to Chapter 55 Unified Development Code to delete Section 5.30.1 and amend Sections 5.17 and 5.18 related to planned project site plan modifications, additional area, height and placement standards, exceptions to height, and parking standards. Moved by Commissioner Dish, seconded by Commissioner Gibrandl. Questions or comments on the proposal? Commissioner Gibrandl and then Commissioner Dish.
I know I'm a visual person, but the whole thing with the different shaped buildings, I really could have used some sort of graphic to explain what you were talking about there.
Okay.
So I think it would make it just much more clear for people to be able to do that. So I would recommend that in there. And then the other thing that I just want to really be clear about is if you are doing an affordable housing thing or a sustainable housing project and you're not a planned project, does that, you don't need to have parking there follow you all the way through depending on wherever you are, or is it only for a planned project that happens?
Well, there'll be no more planned project.
Oh,
So,
right. But,
yeah.
I get it. Okay. I
Yeah.
see what you're saying. Yeah. Right.
So if you meet our definition of affordable development
Right.
or sustainable development, then there's no off-street parking required. So you can still provide some, but
Yeah.
your requirement would be 0.
Okay.
And it would follow for as long as the site plan remains, the development remains per plan.
Mm-hmm. And with some, I haven't looked at your definition for sustainable development, but quite a few of the metrics out there with the more recent versions of LEED or with the Living Building Challenge, you don't actually get certified until you've proven that you're pulling it off for a year.
Yeah.
So if you
Our
haven't,
definition is when you have a solar collector surface. Now that is consistent with other terms that we use, but if you have solar panels, but if you have a solar collector surface covers 60% of the building's footprint area, and you have electrical panels that have capacity to solely power the site with electricity, including any conduit or necessary infrastructure for future conversions if complete electrification is not achievable at the time of initial construction. So
Okay.
we are quite specific, you know, that yes, there's a lot of ways that one can go about being sustainable.
okay.
But if our criteria for both the height waiver and the parking waiver is solar panels on 60% of the roof and electrification.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. If I know some developments have not been able to get away with not having a gas-powered generator. And would it make it, if they were doing everything else and had the 60% and like basically had electrification going on in terms of their capacity and everything, and they had a gas line for a generator there as well, do they still qualify?
I would open it up for discussion on how it should be interpreted in that case.
I think we're going to run into that because you would need to have so much solar capacity that you could basically power your, you know, your whole thing plus whatever, you know what I mean? So you would be off grid essentially in some ways. So, so that's just a wrinkle in there that we'd have to think about. And I don't know if it means just kind of putting some sort of exception in there around that, but I know that that's a common issue. That it's like they want to do it all electric, but they need the backup generator thing too, and it's not going to work. They have to run a gas line for that.
Yeah, I think that the way it's written, actually, a gas generator would still leave them eligible.
Okay.
It doesn't say there shall be no natural gas to the site, no lead. What it says is electrical panels have the capacity to solely power the site by electricity. So.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think it's talking about your primary energy source, not your backup. And also
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
But I think as it's written, to be clear, it doesn't require all electrification.
That's what I was kind of wondering.
It is future-proofing the building for that possibility.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So with this though, well, I guess just basically following pretty typical building code, you're going to have decent windows and insulate and, you know, all that kind of business too, that would go along with other kinds of sustainable development, you know, I mean, but you're really just trying to get at the solar panels and the electrification as kind of the primary things that you're going for and leaving all the other complicated stuff aside.
Yeah.
We could,
this is zoning and not a building code.
yeah, and ideally measurable at the time of occupancy.
Right.
When you talk about those certification programs that require a longer lifespan, that is challenging for us to evaluate and certify at the time.
Right. Yeah. Right. And did you all run this by the sustainability office in terms of kind of what you were thinking about with this?
Yes, I did. I spoke to them. And specifically, I talked about the percentage. And I believe our first was 30%. And myself and the sustainability office, we settled on 60. They were hoping for 100%. But I felt that we could maybe, depending on technology improvements, depending on how much how much this provision is used, I felt we could go up, but I thought that 100% was a little bit too ambitious, given the realities of construction. I did not think that most developers would be able to actually cover 100% of the roof surface. For all types of buildings, we have to keep in mind that this could be pitched roofs, flat roofs, could be on residential, could be on commercial, industrial. So I did work with them on a attainable standard.
Okay. And then I know oftentimes to be able to pull this off, to really try to become, you know, even close to net zero, you pretty much have to combine it with some sort of alternative heat source idea too, you know, heat pump system or some sort of geothermal something. So are we just kind of saying that's not part of it? You're just 60% on the roof and having the capacity to do electrification? I don't know. Commissioner Mills, you may have opinions about this, so you know more about this than I do. But all the buildings that I've kind of been associated with in terms of my own practice, that is always a part of it, is figuring out that whole part of the equation too in terms of energy savings. So that may put too many wrinkles in this, but I just I would want to put it out there just in terms of, you know, getting, having if you're not going to have to require, if you don't have to do the parking, you know, then you know, that's should we make setting a slightly higher bar with that? I guess it's just, I'm putting it out there to the group. That's it for now.
Thank you. Got a bunch of questions too, so I wrote that down when I come back. Commissioner Dish, if you want to go.
Yeah, I just have one quick question because I learn more from what you all say. Or no, actually, it's not a question. I wanted to say that I thought that the alternative that allowed for the rear setback made sense to me because it's not as if they get it automatically. And so planning staff and planning commission would evaluate whether the rear setback, whether you could reduce the required rear setback and whether that would be significantly interfering for an adjacent different, you know, zone. So that, and particularly because because the North Main project wouldn't have qualified without that provision, I think we want that kind of flexibility. So I feel like that's okay. And I'm glad you explained why you had initially excluded it. But I think that people can use their best judgment on as these site proposals come up. So that's all I wanted to say.
I would make sure that it's clear. This wouldn't be a discretionary item. We are just offering this flexibility for all projects. It does have some natural limitations. We are not offering any flexibility for the normal setback area. If the rear setback or the side, if the rear setback is 30 feet, it's 30 feet. And if you wanted to flex that or encroach into that, we are no longer offering any tool for that. What we are doing is for the larger buildings where we have an additional requirement for additional setback, we're saying you can flex that additional component. But we are saying that it's just there. There is no specific approval for it. There's no, it is not a discretionary. It is, we are just offering that flexibility. But the trade-off is we are no longer offering any flexibility for the normal side or rear. We are only offering flexibility to everyone without further approvals for the addition. So we are, it is a, we are still offering a flexibility tool. It is not as powerful as planned projects, but it is now, but it's easier to use. There's no discretionary element.
Okay, so now I'm going to need to hear other people weigh in on that because that makes me a little bit more nervous because it's especially the big buildings that would be annoying.
Yeah. And this is what Mr. Leonard was saying, that it's inherent right now that you can flex that additional area on the side. And he was saying, you know, most often you have residential zoning adjacent to the residential zoning, like for like, probably the scale of buildings is going to be similar, but the scale is more often dissimilar from rear to rear because our boundaries, our zoning district boundaries typically go the entire length of a block, But if they were to split a block, they'll split it lengthwise and not mid-block. So we have both of those. It was originally written with no rear setback. We thought, no, we got to keep the rear setbacks just as they are with additional setback for big buildings, just to shorten up the long definition. And we were at first comfortable with that, but upon the analysis, applying it to some real projects, there can be a case where the rear setback, the addition might not work.
And I think there's just one other thing that I didn't completely understand because I wasn't here for the beginning of all this discussion. So the advantage of what we're talking about is precisely that this is not discretionary. This is now in the zoning code, because everything, of course, I've seen us do has been discretionary.
Yeah.
So, okay, now I understand. So I learned something and now that's done. I have to learn something else.
Yeah. And for you and Commissioner Clark and Commissioner Lee, the plan project it has its pros and cons, and it's not necessarily good or bad, but what it does, it offers unlimited flexibility. There, if you were to read it word for word, it says that you can flex the area height and placement standards. It offers no limitations on it. But it also says, in exchange, if your project achieves these amenities, and one of them was for example, increased open space. There's no minimum threshold. So we haven't really had a project, but reading it black and white, someone could ask for 500 feet of height and provide 1% of open space. And that is what we wanted, and it would meet the standards. So we wanted to be more clear for all parties, clear for the approving bodies about what is an acceptable flexibility and what is acceptable amenities. And we boiled it down to setbacks and height and parking were the most desirable flexibilities to offer. And it boiled down to as well saying that we can, for residential projects, you can work with that additional setback area. For non-residential projects, you can work with the setbacks, but only half of them, 50%. For height, we said you can work with the height, but only 30% of the height limit. And what we'll accept in exchange for that, if you want 30% more height, is you must be either affordable or sustainable. So we picked our 2 priority amenities and our 3 priority flexible standards. And we removed all discretionary elements. So it's, you meet it or you don't. And that was also the theory behind, if you remove this giant tool, we will make it easier to use the new tools, but they're not as powerful.
And again, the kind of relief valve is that we still have planned unit developments, PUDs.
There's still variance, planned unit developments, or rethink your project.
Right. Other comments, questions? Commissioner Lee.
I will echo Commissioner Gibb Randall's comment that some kind of visual would definitely, I think, help deliver some clarity. And I'm just, trying to figure this out on SketchUp, the minimum side 20 plus A and B, kind of going through this, just making sure that I clearly understand what we're voting on. So I'm on board with defining affordability and sustainability. I actually really appreciate your kind of reasonable standard of 60%. I mean, not you can't necessarily cover 100%. We can certainly try, but that's going to be tough. And then, obviously, affordability. With those 2 priorities set, what we are, and I'm just basically kind of reiterating just to make sure I understand. What we are saying is right now it's like we're bowling and the entire lane is massive. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, here are the actual lane guide rails. And we're trying to kind of narrow that. And if you want to go the unlimited route, go the PUD route.
Exactly.
For the planned project side of things, let me at least help define that the areas in which we can give on is minimum side, minimum rear setbacks, and that's really the extent in which we'll work. And so like basically, let's say R3 minimum side is 20. Can't mess with that, but that area of the plus A and B can be flexed. So is that an accurate representation?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, yeah, just echoing again, Commissioner Good Randall's comment, visuals I think would help, especially people even digging in. So maybe what we do is just add in, just even like little pictures. So
Yeah. Understand. Yeah. I'll try to get them in, or I will get them in for council.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. That was the comments I had. Just wanted to make sure I knew what we were actually voting on. So I know we're new to this, so.
Mm-hmm.
I have a clarification right on there, and I have a list, so maybe it'll spur other questions or comments. Just to be clear on the first item, right? This is the setback line. What is currently in our code allows for this flexibility for multiple family residential, like for multifamily residential on the sides. True?
Sides, true.
And does our current code say the CLT U-shaped buildings bit? That was you trying to like say how that could possibly be done.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So this is where, sketching out makes a lot of sense. The new, and to be clear, that part, the flexibility where you're moving within the footprint, effectively you're translating the building now only side to side, or potentially in the mixed use residential, you could go closer to the street, right?
Yeah.
Those do not require affordability or sustainability components.
Correct.
Okay. So we're just saying this is what we talked about for a while, just again, for people who haven't been talking about this for, months. That those are things like oftentimes people want to shift it to save trees, right? Like, or for another reason. And so as long as they're still providing the same amount of open space, the same amount of landscaping, like you can't reduce your landscaping requirements by doing this, right? Like,
yeah, this is only for setbacks. Every other development standard applies.
And so if you need a conflicting land use buffer, which that's a different discussion, like you still got to provide it across the entirety of your side yard, if that's where it's required. True?
Right, true.
Okay. So that's kind of one class of things. And I appreciate you providing the alternate language, but I personally agree that we should not include the rear part in it because there is no discretion anymore, which I think is a good move. I think, again, simplifying things and having staff just be able to say, you meet this, you can do this. It's not like, oh, well, what will planning commission say about this? I think that is a good move.
Okay.
So I think for the time being, not allowing that discretion in the rear yard. And if it's a problem, if staff brings it, like if there are projects where this comes up, letting us know. This is a living document. The zoning ordinance is living. So, but I think that's a move in the right direction. That was my thing that's what I have on that. The next set of things, so this is the height and the parking. Those are where you either need to have affordability, 15% affordability, or you have to have the sustainability components.
Yes.
My first question is, I know for the parking, what you're counting towards either affordability or sustainability cannot count towards your premiums.
Right.
But can 15% affordability get you both additional height and no parking?
Let me read. Yes.
Good. I think that's appropriate. Because again, we are not giving away, this is not in exchange for additional FAR. This is saying, I think that is appropriate. I don't have a problem with that. Again, there's also a limit to how much additional height there could be. And in many ways, like not requiring the parking contributes to those goals. We've talked a lot about whether affordable units need all of the parking that our multiplier requires, particularly as many of the affordable units that we're seeing, sometimes we see larger units, but sometimes we see 1-bedroom units and we require 1.5 spaces per unit.
Right.
So that's one. And then on the other side, sustainability, like hopefully the people that are interested in buying into a building or, renting from a building that have have sustainability features are also not in a personal vehicle all the time, and not parking to that same level. So I think there's a reasonable connection there. So I'm cool with that. But I wanted to highlight that to everybody else, because if anybody has an issue with that, like, that's one of the things that you should, that's been part of our discussion about, like, should these things double count, and where staff landed was they should, for, within these two elements. And I'm okay with that, but I just want to make sure, if anybody else isn't, that they get it off their chest now. The other thing that I want to highlight to make sure that I am reading this right, but also for those who weren't kind of involved in this conversation, the solar collector area. To be clear, it is the building footprint, not the roof area. So what this means is that you don't have to put those solar panels on your roof.
Yes.
So you could do solar carports and have a pitched roof and do solar carports, and that's okay. And I just want to let everybody else know that, again, so there could be opportunities to go higher in the future. Right now, I think 60% it's much more than what we're seeing in the vast majority of developments. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. But also, this doesn't mean that we would never have pitched roofs in the city anymore. If 50% of that roof is north facing, sometimes we put our solar panels east and west, but generally not north. That's the right reading of that, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And that was done for that flexibility. Say you want a rooftop deck, I don't know, but.
Commissioner Sauvé is not here, but I'm pretty sure that she brought that up, and she should get a pat on the back for that, because I thought that was savvy. The final one, going back to what Commissioner Gibrandl asked me about, and that I think is really tricky, right, is that this does not require electrification. And in fact, people could still put in a gas stove. It's not just saying that you don't have to, that what is considered kind of many people consider the hard part now, right, which is the space heating. It's not just that part that could stay gas for the time being. It's that as long as you have a big enough, electrical panel, you could still put in a gas stove, a gas water heater. This is one where a couple meetings ago, I said, we got to get information on, what are the cost trade-offs? And I don't honestly, quite frankly, I've moved in that direction, but I haven't pushed as far on that as I could. So I don't know. I'm really torn about this. On the one hand, I do think that there's certainly cost savings in them in them being enabled to not have to build parking. We know that some developers don't want to build the parking, and we require it adds costs for them. And so for those that are in that boat, this is saving them some money. So even if some of those space heating systems, electrified space heating systems, are more expensive, and what we've heard, right, is that not always upfront, at least over the operations they may be, but not upfront. They may not be more expensive. Even so, maybe there is a savings there. I would say at this time, I don't want to stand in the way. I think that these things are good. I think that the solar panels alone, the 60% area of solar, in my mind, is a step in the right direction. Okay. Again, what the benefits that we're offering are, as Commissioner Lee rightly put, very much narrower, more narrow lane. We've highlighted electrification, and this is also one where, because zoning is a living document, I hope that as we get more information, maybe that is the next thing. It's easier to change, right? Is just to strike that part, and we can come back to that. But I don't know that I personally am in a place to be able to say, yeah, we should just require all electrification right now. And so rather than have this wait for that additional information, I would move forward with it where it is. May not be as sustainable as I'd like it to be, but I think it's not also going to mean that no one will take us up on this.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So that's kind of where I fall on it. That's what was on my list. I don't know if that spurred any. Yes, Mr. Leonard.
I'm trying to, I just want to follow up on the question about heat pumps and heating mechanisms. I know that question came up. I'm trying to find the best way to present some information to the commission on that. So hopefully that will be part of our education sometime here. But I would also just ask you to think about that in that same context, that as we get more specific into building systems, we are locking that building in as part of that approval. So if we specify a certain kind of heat, a heat pump, and that's conditioned upon the approval, and then in the future, they want to do something different, they can't. So that's, this is absolutely the opportunities where we want to figure out where our levers are to advance sustainability. But I just want us to be mindful of making sure that we're not creating long-term harm. So that's why, particularly, whatever we're doing, if we can do it, measure it at a snapshot in time, that's particularly beneficial, I think, from a land use perspective. It's not to say we can't explore those things. And like I said, I'm working to try to bring some more knowledge about that. But I would just ask you to be mindful of that, so that we are not delving into those aspects of the building that, in fact, we want flexibility long-term. So.
I appreciate that. And my understanding is some of the technologies are just that they apply to different kinds of buildings, and which means that it's more, again, the kind of cost considerations now are different in different kinds of buildings. And so it may mean that that's possible in, multifamily, like attached structures, and it's not something that's there. I don't know, like for detached structures. And so that was the point of the kind of understanding the technology, but point well taken. I would say, just like for the record, like systems that are built on natural gas are not long for this world. Like, I mean, we are quickly moving away from it, and all of the alternatives are getting cheaper. And so, to future-proof ourselves, right? Like, it's the wise investment if you're going to own that place for a while to like think about doing, even if it's not the exact same technology, something that is on the electricity system, which can be more easily decarbonized than on natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, is better. So, is more future-proofed. Commissioner Milstein.
So I'm supportive of these changes. I know we've been talking about it for a while now, for the past several months. So I'm really supportive. And Alexis, thank you for all your work on this. Mr. Leonard, I would love to get education on heat pumps, electrification, from somebody who knows it better than Google. I seem to do a lot of research, and it's really conflicting. And I don't know if it's the natural gas lobby it seems really conflicting. So I would really like to learn from somebody who gets it and who can really educate us, because over the last 2 years, we've been getting a lot more technical in this. And it's a big part with 820 that I feel like I'm not educated enough at this point to be able to do a really good review of these projects that are, 100% electricity. So I would love that idea. However you can get us that education would be greatly appreciated.
So if not Google, then Wikipedia, yeah?
Bottom line, a lot of it's like, what electricity price and gas price are they comparing to each other? Like, that's among the reasons that there's conflicting information. So, sorry. Sarah's 2 cents worth, which is not maybe that much better than Google or Wikipedia. Commissioner Dish.
I would love to hear just a tiny bit more deliberation on this issue of, as long as the building is electric capable, we're okay with the developer or the homeowner, depending on what we're talking about, installing all gas appliances up front. And I I'm coming in late to this conversation, and so I do not want to be throwing up roadblocks. I would just like to hear a little bit more deliberation of, I understand why it's great to have it be electric capable. I get that. But appliances have a lifespan, you know, some of them 20 years, you know, the best of them. And that's, you know, we're talking 2030 about our carbon footprint. And it's 2020 right now. And these projects are going to be actually built 5 years from now, which means that, you know, 2025 plus 10 to 20 years, we have gas appliances in these buildings, unless we have people who are so environmentally minded that they'll throw out an appliance that's expensive and that has a lot of life in it and replace it with electric. So just a little bit more.
Commissioner Lee.
I suppose this is more of a semantic interpretation. When you read this language, the sustainability component, I'm on page 4, it says that when a solar collector service covers at least 60%, blah, 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 has the capacity to solely power the site by electricity, including any conduits and other necessary infrastructure for future conversions, if complete electrification is not achievable at the time of the initial construction. So it's that kind of like qualification that kind of gives me pause. I mean, Commissioner Dish, I totally hear you. It's like, oh yeah, putting all the infrastructure, but I'm going to go all gas. But I think that if tells you, like, if it is possible to go electrification, then you should do it to satisfy the sustainability component. So it's like the idea of a developer saying to themselves, or a home builder saying, I'm going to get 60% solar panels on my roof, and I am going to, you know, and I'm only going to put in gas, but I'm going to put in the infrastructure. Now, he comes to us and says, or, you know, he goes to staff and says, you know, I satisfy the sustainability component. I think there would be some level of basis to say, well, you could do electrification, and it's only if it's not achievable at that time. So I don't know if that interpretation, somebody else could argue against it, and trust me, my attorneys tell me I'm reading things wrong all the time. So this is more of a semantic thing, but I could see how, at least we would certainly argue, you could have done complete electrification, but this is, you know, you're really just choosing not to. So I don't think you satisfy this sustainability component. I'd like to hear your interpretation on that, because I completely get it. Maybe somebody does it just barely enough, right, to get it. I just don't see somebody who does 60% and puts in the infrastructure and doesn't follow through with anything and just keeps it gas. But I wonder if complete electrification is not achievable. And I just wonder how that discussion of, well, I couldn't do it because the cost just wasn't there. And then we get into an argument about, you know, the marginal, decreasing marginal benefits of scaling cost benefits. So I feel like that language should give you the protection you need, because you could certainly push back and say, well, if you couldn't do it, but are you telling me you can't do it right now? So that's my reading. I'll leave it up for discussion.
Mr. Leonard, you unmuted for a minute. Go for it.
No, I think that not achievable is going to be difficult to measure. It's going to be difficult to dispute. So that's why I said that at its core, I don't think this requires full electrification. But I don't think this is lost in any of the dialogue here, but I just want to, you know, the benefit is we will have a lot of electric power being generated, because these developments are going to take use of 60% of solar collectors. So even from my lens, at worst, the typical building is going to be shifted to a more sustainable measure, because there's going to be more renewable power generated at that site. And it's not going to be in anybody's interest to say, well, I'm going to make this investment in this solar collecting system, but I'm not going to use it, or I'm just going to sell it back to the grid because of the current imbalance of sort of inflow outflow rates. So So I appreciate the, but I don't want to lose sight of that fact that, inherent in here, we're building a lot of renewable electrical capacity. It doesn't mean that it's going to be exclusive by any stretch.
Well, and the reality is, like, if you can take that solar power that you're generating and not have to sell it back to the grid, like, you want to electrify as much as you can, because that's how those solar panels pay for themselves more quickly and over time, right? And so if some of the concern about electrifying everything is about the operational costs, well, you've now just reduced your long-term energy bills because you've made the investment up front in the solar panels, meaning that you're not going to have to pay for them in the future. So I think that those things are compatible. I brought it up because this is what I do in part, like pick holes in things. And maybe this is just me, I'm totally ready to say to people, like, no, if you want to be able to unlock this, right? Like if you want to consider it a sustainable building, sustainable development, then you need to get an electric stove, or, what is the fancy ones? The magnets, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have one.
Induction.
Induction, thank you. There's magnets involved. And so it kind of bothers me that you could still have a gas stove through this, personally, because that's the arguments against electrification of that, your dryer, right? Your hot water heater are, in my mind, a little bit weaker than on, your furnace. This is new construction though. And so I really thank you for pushing us on this, Commissioner Dish, because I wonder, earlier on I was suggesting that we swing in one way, which is let's do this. It gets us some solar, and then we can tighten it later. I mean, the other way to go is to tighten it now and require all electrification along with the 60% solar. And then if you don't get anybody taking you on this, right? What it means is that if they want that extra height, then they're probably not going to get a variance for extra height, right? So they'll go for or they would have to do a PUD. It might mean that people are building parking that they don't want to build, right? So that's a risk in my mind. But again, then you can loosen it. Like I said, though, the cost of things are coming down. So Mr. Leonard, that was very, whoa, that caused a lot of reaction. So I don't know, Mr. Leonard, and then I saw Commissioner Milstein, and then Commissioner Clark, and then Commissioner Lee.
I was just going to suggest that Planner DeLeo could maybe start brainstorming how that sustainability component language might be amended if it were to require electrification. Mm-hmm. But I want to point to, I believe that 60% coverage of solar collectors is a benefit. I believe that electrification is a benefit. I think that linking those together are totally appropriate, but I just want to be mindful, we are expanding the gateway that you need to achieve to be able to access this, which is fine. I think that where that should come down to is, if we don't believe that one or the other by themselves, if that language is amended, is appropriate to meet our goal of sustainability, then it's not appropriate. If meeting that goal is only by the coupling of those two together, then so be it. So,
Commissioner Milstein, and then Commissioner Clark.
So I think going down the path, Commissioner Mills, is I think it's a good path to go, but I don't think this is the time for it. My concern is that it's sort of like the downtown premiums. Remember how we worked for a long time on downtown premiums? Mr. Leo, you worked with us for years on downtown premiums, and we came up with this amazing downtown premiums amendment, and it was beautiful. And how many people have taken advantage of it? I'm pretty sure it's 0 the last time we actually checked. So my concern is, I know this is well intentioned, but we don't want to make it. We don't want to go down this road to then just say we've spent all this time and we were way ahead of our time. I think where we are right now is going to be better. So I think we should continue down this path and just, sort of note it, and when the time's right, come back and amend this. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Commissioner Clark?
Yeah, so I was going to agree with that and just kind of caution that if kind of setting the all-electric threshold too high immediately might just kind of up the cost of the units that get developed under the premium, and then kind of remove, because things like induction stoves and stuff, they're still expensive, and then even when they are feasible, it's not necessarily something that all developers are super fluent and comfortable in going, and and then the other thing would be like hallway heating costs in common areas for apartments and things like that. Usually it's the tenants that are paying utility bills, and it's something to kind of be mindful of, that a higher rate if it's depending on the system, and just make sure who's utilizing. That's it.
Very good. Commissioner Lee, you had your hand up earlier too.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to second what Commissioner Milstein and Clark just said, that I think we might be making it too onerous, and that I would be okay. I would be in favor of supporting this in its current form. I'm just thinking of a developer that's building something that's bigger than 2,500 square feet and 36 feet, and then just saying, well, I'm just not going to furnish it, right? I mean, it seems like an overreach. At a certain point, I just want to be realistic about the approach. Again, I certainly am in support of the intent behind it, but I do want, and I think Commissioner Milstein, you have a lot of history here. We want this to be, I think the end goal of 60% of roofs being solar powered is a good enough end on its own. So that would be my comment.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Been a really interesting discussion. Like Commissioner Milstein, I would probably also benefit from more education on this topic in particular with the electrification. But I just wanted to, if my memory serves me correctly, I feel like we've had pretty good luck when we push developers to consider electrification in a couple of recent projects. I think there's probably a lot more education that they need around this as well. I think solar is pretty well understood, but I mean, I think we brought up electrification to one developer and he wasn't even clear what we were referring to. So, maybe sort of our stopgap is passing this as with 60% solar electrification ready. And then just sort of, in our conversations with the developer, try to, push that you should also consider this, and just sort of see what that uptake looks like. And then maybe if people are just kind of doing it, we can require it in the future, if things change. But I think I'm comfortable with not requiring that right now.
Commissioner Gibrandel.
Yeah, I think that this last piece of, if it's not achievable at the time of initial construction, I feel like it would be a real cheat to say, oh, but we're going to have gas stoves, because that's like, you can totally achieve that now. That's nothing. An electric stove is cheaper than a gas stove is. So it's like, I think that's a no-brainer. Like, there's some things it's kind of like, come on, you can get it, you can do this. I think the thing that is still, and I don't know very much about this, but I do know something about the whole, heat pump thing and all that kind of business, is that it does really vary from building form to building form, and climate and all kinds of things. And so that's the part that feels the mushiest to me right now in terms of how to handle building energy. And so I think it is a rapidly developing field. And so that's the piece that I remember, like in the last one that we approved on North Main, like those center units were fine, right? Because they shared walls, but it was the outside units that got tricky, right? I mean, so it really, I think, is going to depend on all kinds of things in terms of building form and siting and stuff like that. So what I would hope is that we would push them on the low-hanging fruit things of electrification, like not having a gas stove. but that we would, but that the flexibility comes in with the, especially some of the heating systems, I think that they're still very much in development in that way. My one misgiving is that, do you remember the project? I don't remember the name of it now, that was on Washington, that was really, really tall and different setup, but I mean, that thing is tall and tiny, it's skinny, and 60% of their roof would, power the lobby. That's it. You know what I'm saying? So I think we're sort of imagining these different structures, and they really could be, I don't know, maybe in D1 is kind of a different deal, than what this would be used for. But it's like we're sort of imagining that 60% is really going to do something. But if the building form is tall and skinny, then it's not going to do a whole lot. And we would want them to electrify more, So again, I feel like we can move it forward as it is. But I guess what I would want is that with staff, as they are meeting with developers before they put all their plans together and things like that, that you make it really clear to them that if it's not achievable is like really important. That it's not like, well, I want to do gas stoves because that's what the marketplace wants. It's like, well, there's some nice, electric stoves out there too, so that they get it, kind of what the discretion is, but to leave it flexible at this point, but to kind of just push them on it in some ways. But I really would like to have more education on this. I also want to make sure that whoever you choose for that is really familiar with not just single family homes, but thinking about multifamily or commercial buildings or things like that too, Mr. Leonard, as you're kind of putting that together, because they're different animals in a lot of ways, or that we get kind of a variety of expertise in there, because we do see a variety of who these are for. And I think that the solutions can be really different with different things. You can control your office setting in terms of how people handle their heat and all that kind of thing, because you have a landlord and all that kind of thing. But with the apartments or condos or whatever, it's up to people to do their own thing, and those can have really different impacts on things. So when we do get to that point, I would just want to make sure that we have a variety of expertise reporting to us that reflect the variety of building types that we have. So, but Brett had just looked like he was responding to something I was saying. Do you want to just go before the next person?
Yeah, the Washington example is a great one, and I just want to clarify, in this case, if you provided the 60%, that only gives you the height, whereas that project actually got an FAR benefit. So, so I appreciate your point. That would be a relatively small footprint, but in that circumstance, that's not going to give that project the same benefit that it received to get to its current configuration.
Yep, I get it.
Just for others, and correct me if I'm wrong, the FAR that it got, I mean, under current code, in order to get that FAR, because to what Alex was saying before, or to Commissioner Milstein was saying before, like, we wanted a lot. You would have to provide, that building wouldn't get that FAR anymore. They have to provide affordable housing, or I guess pay into the fund. Actually, right? Like, I mean, it's significant.
Provide units, you'd have to provide some units, but there is an option that you could make a contribution for a portion of them.
Right, so no matter, yeah. And subsequently, we haven't seen any other proposals similar.
Although it has, I totally agree with that. And I think that's something we definitely want to monitor, but I'm not sure the past year is the best measure.
Yeah. Commissioner Lee, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, this is just for staff. I'm going to recommend we speak with David Everest. He did our energy audit. He's a PhD. He works at Siemens, but he provides a lot of municipal governments with energy consultations. So we talked about kind of the payoffs with electrification, which could take 20 to 30 years. So we talked about, other financing sources, but I'll send you his contact information. He seemed very knowledgeable. And then the other kind of point, so I will send you that resource. And he's actually a guy that's not just on Google. I mean, he's been doing this for like 30 years or something like that. And he's very up to date on the latest. And then the other thing that I just want to also mention that, and it may not be for a development, but I have gone through the process of having to try and increase the energy grid for one of our office buildings. And that is probably the most, like, DTE is always, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They take a long time to respond. So by pushing for electrification, again, of which sustainability goals and future-proofing is very imperative, I do want to say that, we have to be also mindful to a certain extent capacity of the electric grid that's existing, and that could make things very difficult for, we ultimately do have a shortage of housing, right? I mean, Washington County is growing rapidly. Let me retract that. It's growing steadily. So it's not like this crazy, it's not Austin, Texas, but it's, it's slow and steady. But that we do have a shortage, and I think we have an imbalance of trade. So if we want somebody to actually utilize this, we don't want to make it overly restrictive, again, as Commissioner Milstein was saying. So I just want people, just a little anecdote, it was very difficult to go through that process. It cost over $500,000, and it was one of those things where we just didn't have enough electricity. It was also for a very specific, actually, commercial use. So I don't know if residential would demand that level of power, but I just want people to be, cognizant of electrify. There's only a finite amount of electricity in a grid at a certain point, and the solar will help, and we should all push towards that. So I think encouraging solar makes sense in this particular instance.
Just to that point, for the new commissioners that weren't here as part of this discussion 6 months ago, when the electric vehicle ordinance came before us, this was something that got brought up. And part of a committee that was set up on Energy Commission that was like drafting that ordinance, I sat in on it and had DTE do some analysis, because this is the cost, right, of the hookup, and the additional capacity is one of the things that got brought up. And what DTE told us again and again is that retrofitting is really expensive. Build it in from the beginning. And that's among the reasons that I think we're moving in the right direction, to say when you're building this new construction, and the vast majority of the things that are going to fall under this ordinance are new construction, like you're already having to pay, upgrade your service. Don't do it halfway, because it will save you money in the long run. And I think so, to the extent that we are pushing people towards that, will help us all, right? Collectively, it will, we know that we're moving in that direction anyway. And so building it in earlier, I think, makes sense. Kind of coming back to the question that Commissioner Dish asked, and I can always argue both sides. I think I am swayed by the arguments made that this is good. This is a good first step. Let's see where it goes. I think I heard a continued call for more education on the electrification side, and that even though it is not always in our lane, it comes up a lot and it intersects with a lot of the stuff. And because it's integral into the built environment, that is part of what we're doing. And to the extent that we can use some carrots that we have through zoning, right, to get things that, maybe aren't historically, part of what is our lane. I think what I'm hearing from you is that, like, yes, I should put some more attention to working with Mr. Leonard to do that education, not just for us, but increasingly what I was hearing, and at least as the way I had scoped it out and kind of asked for some more information, is use us as the guinea pig to give us information that would then be used for a public education campaign, right? Like, because this is something that I think would be helpful. So I am summarizing, I'm happy with everything that we see in the existing ordinance. I think that there's some mushy language, honestly, at the end of that sustainability part that may get us some gas stoves, but I also expect us to revisit this in not such a short, not too long of a time. And so I'm okay with it as is. Commissioner Dish.
No, I just want to say quickly, thank you. I just wanted more deliberation. I wanted to hear more arguments because I haven't been here, and I really appreciate you all doing that.
And now, since we deliberated it, you can show both sides when this goes on to council and say, we talked about this and let me tell you. So, and our meetings will not go until 1:30. So we can get all that deliberation done here. So it can be shorter at city council. Anything else before I ask for a roll call vote? Okay, Mr. Leonard, please.
Commissioner Milstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Gibrandal,
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Dish,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
We didn't hear you.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Excellent.
thank you, Commissioner Mills.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. DeLeo.
Welcome.
We have 2 more items of business. Can we take a quick water break? It's almost 9 o'clock. Let's come back at, I have 8:57, like 9:05. So perfect. All right, we'll see you then. 11A, other business. This is committee memberships. So Mr. Leonard.
Yeah, so pretty self-explanatory. We have a series of long-standing subcommittees that have typically been comprised solely of planning commissioners. We also have designees of the planning commission to other groups. So I'm just going to kind of run through these, and then we also have a couple of new ones to discuss, and I'll touch on those. So the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, currently it is not met for a while. It was originally conceived as a intersect between the city's Housing and Human Service Advisory Board, which advocates for affordable housing and human service delivery, sort of safety net support, and the Planning Commission. Currently, we have 2 members designated on that. The Master Plan Review Committee subcommittee, we recently tried to undertake a full update to our master plan. We weren't able to do that, so I would really like to get this committee sort of activated and talking to think about ways that we can sort of perhaps look at updating our master plan in sort of more manageable chunks. But I will say that generally I feel like we have a lot of ordinance work on our plate right now, so I think it's conceivable that gets sort of pushed back later in our work. The Ordinance Revisions Committee is a standing committee that's comprised of 4 commissioners. They meet on the 4th Tuesday of each month, because having your first of Tuesdays is not enough obligation. And that group is helps staff and the commission to work through the details, explore the language that ultimately arrives on the your full planning commission agenda as hopefully more fully formed ordinance amendments. Then we have a couple of relationships through designees. These are typically individuals to other groups. We have the DDA Partnerships Committee, which Commissioner Gibrando mentioned. She's the current designee. That is an intersect of a wide variety of folks that share information, obviously focused on the downtown district. Commissioner Gibrando is also currently our designee to the Environmental Commission. We have a spot that is currently undesignated, a designee from the Planning Commission to the Transportation Commission. That was previously Commissioner Woods, who resigned from the commission, so that is a vacancy. And then listed on the appointments is also the Zoning Board of Appeals. So state law provides that a planning commissioner can jointly serve both on the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Commission. It's not required. I will note that currently the Zoning Board of Appeals is a full board. However, if there was a planning commission interested in that role, that can provide some sort of continuity of those projects that are seeking some action at both boards. But the Zoning Board of Appeals, as Commissioner Milstein can attest, also just considers a high volume of petitions that aren't related to planning commission action as well. A couple of new additions to this proposed assignment chart and discussion are, we talked about this a little bit at the meeting and in our work plan, cultivating a conversation about the history of single family zoning in the city. And this was, I think, what I heard from the Planning Commission reflected in the work plan is this might be an opportunity to expand our subcommittee horsepower beyond the members of this Planning Commission. I don't know if we'll arrive at any specifics, but I'd love for us to start exploring how you envision selecting, putting together that committee, how it might help us craft that community conversation going forward. And then we also have, through action of the City Council, and I think this was included in the summary I provided, is Planning Commission designate to the Center of the City Initiating Committee. And this is a follow-up on the Center of the City Task Force, which made a series of recommendations for use of this, basically on top of the library parking structure and that entire block. That would be a Planning Commission selecting a member to put forward who would ultimately be a affirmed and selected by the city council to serve on that group. And I don't profess to be an expert in that group, but I think the goal of that is to start developing the sort of implementing the steps that the task force identified for really cultivating that as a true community commons, both in sort of physicality and programming and philosophy about how that space can be used. So ideally at the end of this, you guys all figure out who wants to be where, and I make notes in this table, and then you make a motion to approve it.
So I still, do you have a question about what we're doing, Commissioner Gibrandel?
I just want to clarify that the DDA Partners Group changed its name.
Yes, it is now.
And it is now the affordability, it's still the DDA, but it's the Affordability / Economic Development Committee. And so it's just for the DDA. It's not for the city in general, but Jennifer Hall is on it and things like that. So
Sorry, you had mentioned that before, and I didn't update the table.
yeah, so it just so you realize that, I don't know how that dovetails or not with the affordability group that you're thinking about going to. So
In terms of process, Mr. Leonard, we don't have a public hearing because this is our other business. I'm going to read the motion. We're going to amend it, right? We're going to tell you how to amend it as we go, and then we'll vote on what all of those amendments that we put on there. And from my perspective, these need not be, we're putting assignments on there. You don't have to do all the formal amendment process. We're taking it as a whole. So the motion reads, the Ann Arbor Planning Commission approves the Planning Commission subcommittee and designee assignments. Moved by Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. Now we're in discussion so that we can fill out the table. Commissioner Lee.
So do we like wrestle for this, or no, that's I guess I'll put my preferences out there. I think my skills would be best served either on the Transportation Commission or the Zoning Board of Appeals. So my sub concentration in the planning department was transportation, and I've served on the actual citizen transportation like advisory board. So I'm familiar with the plans already. I don't know if that diversifies, but I just want to throw those two. I see they're open anyways. I understand the ZBA is full, but hopefully that at least throws out if anybody wants to wrestle. Okay, so.
I don't think you're going to get anybody wrestling with you from ZBA unless Commissioner Clark has different preferences. Great, we got 2 boxes filled in.
Don't everybody jump in at once.
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Milstein.
Mr. Leonard, do we have any idea what the time commitment is for the Center of the City Initiating Committee?
I don't. At this point, I believe I asked, and the group is still being organized. I think at this point it'll be a monthly meeting, and it is tentatively, it looks like it's going to be the second Thursday of the month in the evening, probably around 6 or 7 o'clock is my understanding. So I would guess it would be a monthly meeting with probably some work in between, probably not as heavy of a load as you as the planning commissioner, but probably some degree of external work beyond the meetings themselves. And I would say part of that is that I think that committee is being formed. So I think part of that will be sort of determined by that committee itself, how it wants to operate. I think it's going to be staffed by Heather Safarth of our public services or our systems planning group, a community engagement specialist. She also worked with the task force. She's fantastic. So I think should be a good group. Challenging issue for sure, though.
Were you volunteering, Commissioner Milstein? No. Commissioner Clark, was that a hand?
I was just gonna kind of like Commissioner Lee, throw out, I guess, where I think I could be of use in affordable housing might make sense. I've also been interested in like the master plan committee, and I'm not entirely sure about the details of the single family zoning committee, but that kind of seems like it would tie in to my background pretty well. And transportation, but I feel like there's already probably pretty bit of interest there already. I know. That's it.
Great. And honestly, like you can see kind of based on the boxes, everybody's got a couple, like couple, 2, 3. So that sounds reasonable. I don't think any of those are over tapped. So Commissioner Dish.
Yeah. I feel like there are limits to how much I can take on because of the Environmental Commission, the Solid Waste Working Group, and the Zero Waste Working Group, which I think are sort of folding together, but that's good. But certainly the single family zoning conversation, it might be, I mean, I would love to just have that called the Community Conversations Committee so that it wouldn't have to be so charged and hot button. And I definitely would like to do that. Yeah, I'm already on the Environmental Commission, so Commissioner Gibrandl and I both have that covered, which I think is really good. But I probably can't, I'm not allowed to count that because I'm already doing it.
We usually I feel like we've given our council rep a pass. Like being on one of the others, like so don't feel overtaxed, especially, this is your first year too, so.
Yeah.
All right, so I think there's more conversation about community conversations or single family zoning. I think that probably warrants some structuring and discussion about us as a committee, but I would say probably of most immediacy is a center of the city initiating committee member.
Anyone interested? I hate to sign up the people that aren't here. I feel like I did get an email from one of them saying, oh, I could do whatever. But that's kind of.
Well, if they said it and they're not showing up,
maybe I should go and dig out her email to make sure it was as open-ended as what I remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are interested in getting that committee going, and I appreciate everybody already has a heavy lift. I think that the council would value if we can find somebody. I'll leave it to you how much you want to presume on your colleagues. Like Commissioner Abrams, I think she said she was generally happy with her appointments, which are affordable housing ordinance revisions, and she's on the executive committee, which is just comprised of the chair, vice chair, and secretary. I think it'd be helpful if we could maybe identify at least, if we're concerned about it, maybe identify a first choice and a second choice, maybe depending if somebody's not available.
Commissioner Dish.
This is just a question, and it's purely just a question, just a thought. Yeah, I'm looking at this table and I'm looking at a lot of these are demanding subcommittees, and the Planning Commission itself is quite demanding. And I know like this is probably not at all feasible, but it just occurs to me that Councilmember Briggs is on the Center of the City Committee. I wonder if she could be a reporting member to Planning Commission because she served on Planning Commission. She has that expertise. I wonder if that would be a feasible substitute if if it turns out that the members of the Planning Commission feel very stretched and this doesn't feel entirely feasible to them. You know, given that Planning Commission meets 3 to 4 times a month already, I think it's a lot to ask our members. And I understand that this is an ordinance, and so I think the center of the city was created by ordinance, right, or resolution, Mr. Leonard?
Resolution.
Yeah. I mean, if the desire is to have someone with planning expertise who can communicate with Planning Commission, perhaps Council Member Briggs would suit that role. It's not clear to me what the intent is actually in the resolution.
Yeah, I don't know either. I would presume it was probably both ways. It's, you know, what knowledge and experience from the Planning Commission, what is the commission seeing and reporting back. It is a good question, you know, as a public asset, it may not have, depending on what occurs, it may not have a lot of interface with the Planning Commission, but yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what that intention was. Commissioner Lee, the ZBA is full now, so there's going to be a little bit of a window.
One meeting a month.
My preference would be actually master plan review is like a really exciting topic for me. So if the ZBA is not, you know, if it's full, I used to work right across the street from that center of the city, and I know just, you know, I walk by that igloo all the time, so it's not something I'm very particularly, you know, if I got to serve my city, I will. But I think that I could add more specific value to the master plan review.
And Transportation Commission, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I'm not trying to volunteer necessarily, but tell me again when you think the meetings are for the center of the city thing.
Second Thursday of the month, probably at 6 or 7 o'clock.
Okay. I mean, my issue is just like being over committed, and my husband might like literally kill me if I do something like this.
I was also, if I understand appropriately, from the overview that you gave, it's unlikely the master plan review committee is probably not going to be very active, and historically honestly hasn't been so active except when we were like, I know that the commissioners that were on were very active in helping select the consultant or vet the consultants. Yes. So I'm wondering, she's not here. I wouldn't want to put her as like make it a dark blue square, but I wonder if Commissioner Sauvé, that might be something that she would be willing to do, since she is on, one of her assignments is to the master plan review committee, which again, we don't expect to be active. So that's the other thing that I would say because I feel like Commissioner Lee, it doesn't hurt to have people in there in case that committee does stand up, but I mean, sometimes it hasn't met all year, like in the entire fiscal year.
Since I've been on planning commission and we've never met, so.
Yeah, no, and as I said, I'd like to start that committee up, but I honestly think that I feel like we've got a pretty good chunk of ordinance work to do that I'd probably prioritize first. But I do feel strongly, we've talked about it. At some point, we're going to have to figure out the master plan update. It may not, that doesn't mean we're going to have to do it comprehensively, but I would love at some point to have that committee meet and just start brainstorming, you know, what are some chunks or some pieces, but I appreciate your point. I don't see that happening immediately. I like people confirming that they're interested in that, so when we're ready to do it, it's there, but I think that there probably is a bit of a window before that.
And
Right.
I think that's an indirect way of saying, hey, you should join the Center of the City initiative. So.
Well, I was actually, now I'm going to put somebody else on the spot and to say, is the Affordable Housing Committee meeting? Because if, I don't want to put our former chair on the spot, but if that is an inactive committee too, then there should be some box. So perhaps I'm an equal opportunity caller outer. Commissioner
He's in.
Milstein.
I would love to serve on the single family zoning subcommittee conversation.
Thank you. That will help to fill that one out. As Commissioner Dish said, like the idea, I don't want to put, I like the creative thinking on Commissioner Briggs, but I think probably the intention was that it was two-way, and I don't want to assign Commissioner Briggs up for another committee that she just got off of too, having to come here. That time is really hard, especially as you know, because we do meet, and also like Commissioner Hammerschmidt, getting, sign off.
She would come all the time. She would just come and report once, every once in a while.
Is it okay?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry. I just knowing that affordable housing hasn't been like super active makes me even more interested in the single family zoning, along with if there's space to consider for that one.
But no
Right.
takers on the center of the city.
So why don't,
Is it like ongoing, or is there like a like is it like we're gonna meet forever, or we're gonna meet for like 6 months? Is there any?
it's a good question. Let me see, let me see if I can find out that answer for you real quick.
Okay.
And again, I think we can ask Commissioner Abrams and Commissioner Sauvé, who aren't here, because maybe they are interested and like they're just not here to represent that.
I mean, so in my day job, I work a lot on parks and open space. Actually, right now, it's like my sort of main focus. So like, I'm not interested. I'm just literally trying to balance my life.
Amen. Commissioner Dish.
I think it's a really exciting committee. I think what's off-putting about it is that it's a new venture, and it's a really creative and visionary project. And so there is some sort of feeling of like, okay, what exactly would I be getting myself into? And it's different when you're looking at stuff that is established and you know how that's going to work out. And so I think that's why people are feeling a little intimidated about it, but it's going to make a wonderful transformation of that part of downtown. So, I think it's really cool. It's just, I get why people who are already on planning, which is the most demanding commission that there is, and we have a huge schedule and we have a huge amount of work that we plan to do by June. I get the concern.
Yeah, it's not clear, but it doesn't seem to be structured to deliver something by a time frame and be done. So I would envision this to be sort of an ongoing, I think it is about, as it's titled, what are the next steps to start realizing some of the visions for that park and plaza and open space. So I think it's intended to be an ongoing resource in that regard. I don't think that means it's responsible for doing all of that, but I think the goal of this is to take the vision and probably start prioritizing what are the next steps that we as a community should do in order to move forward. So maybe what we do, for lack of a better idea, is if the Planning Commission was comfortable, we would designate potentially both Commissioners Abrams and Sauvé for now. I will reach out to them. I would ask that that be done in an acknowledgement that if either one of them is interested in that, that would be put forward to the city council with the blessing of the planning commission. And then if for some reason they can't because of conflicts or other factors, it would just have to return for, at that point, I think we'd either want to make sure we can forward somebody, or if we can't, we should probably communicate to the council that we don't think that the makeup as recommended is the right makeup, and why that is, as relates to the planning commission, not wholly.
Right. That seems great to me. It allows us to move forward on this. It doesn't commit either one of them, but it gives us some options.
Do we keep do we even keep the affordable housing and master plan review lines on there if they're really not active, I guess is my question. Because it's like the blue box gets filled, but it's not really happening. Whereas I have blue boxes that are filled that are happening every month, and I go to these meetings, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I have to go to DDA and I have to go to environmental commission, at these meetings.
Nobody wants to hear nobody wants to hear you complain.
I was actually going to circle back and say, are you okay? We didn't talk about the people that are already marked if anybody wanted to be moved off of things.
I am fine being on what I'm on. And it's like a known entity, kind of like what, I think that's part of it. But I also I think if you're on one of the ones that isn't really meeting, then that's just part of what we're weighing here too,
I mean, I think it's a good question. It's a good question. I would look at them a little differently. I actually probably see more work in the future from Master Plan Review Committee than the Affordable Housing Committee. And I think one of the reasons for that is the Affordable Housing Committee was really, it was a brainstorming function of those two groups. And they talked about ways that we could make land use policy potentially to advance our affordable housing goals. And I don't want to say that we can't always advance that further, but I value the work the Planning Commission in the city has done in this regard already. We talked about premiums. We're talking about transit zoning. We're talking with the proposed amendments this evening make affordable housing. It's not to say that I don't value that relationship, but on the flip side, I feel that you as a board pretty strongly internalize affordable housing in the work that you do as it is, without necessarily that push. So my initial response to that is, if you wanted to sort of narrow the bands of assignments, I might start there before I would remove the master plan committee.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I just wanted to point out, and this may be a coincidence, but neither Commissioner Abrams nor Commissioner Sauvé are here tonight, and it is a Thursday night. And so I don't know if that means that they have conflicts that wouldn't work out for them to serve on Center of the City Initiating Committee. So I will say, if we could check with them, and neither one of them want to do it or can't do it, and if you can get a little more clarity on time, because 7 is easier for me than 6. I could be that third.
All right.
But a choice, whatever.
Thank you, Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I appreciate that. I think your background and your work is actually quite applicable to that.
I fully agree. This is actually like a real struggle for me, because I also don't really want to roll off ORC. I've been on it for like 3 months. So, yeah.
Well, I haven't removed you from that, by the way.
No,
I was going to say, all of the new commissioners, you would have to arm wrestle me to get off of ORC. I love ORC.
But you wouldn't need to take me off master planning committee if I did Center of the City.
Okay. So, Affordable Housing Committee, we leave it as it is for now. I have Commissioners Abrams, Clark, and Milstein. The Master Plan Review Committee, leave it for now. I have Commissioners Clark, Hammerschmidt, Lee, and Sauve. Ordinance Revisions Committee remains as it is. Commissioners Abrams, Hammerschmidt, Mills, and Sauve. Executive Committee is by officers. I'm going to skip single family zoning community conversations for now. Center of the City Initiating Committee will be with the full support of the Planning Commission, Commissioner Sauve or Abrams, and if unavailable, Commissioner Hammerschmidt. The Downtown Development Authority Affordability and Economic Development Committee will be maintained as Commissioner Gibb Randall. Environmental Commission, Commissioner Gibb Randall. The Transportation Commission, Commissioner Lee. And I'm going to put forth Commissioner Lee potentially as the Zoning Board of Appeals should a spot open in the future. Frankly, you would have sort of another crack at that because you would have to actually apply to that to the mayor and for appointment. But this is kind of a planning commission. We're not going to fight you for that. Does that sound consistent? All right. So now let's go to community conversations, single family zoning. So I've got Commissioners Clark, Dish, and Milstein expressing interest in that so far. So, this is I think this is a big opportunity. It's on our work plan. Conversations are happening locally as our last working session. Conversations are happening nationally over a tumultuous year of our country. The Planning Commission is interested in exploring how racial inequities, zoning, what is there to learn? How are these things interrelated? How does equity relate to these things? My sense is that the Planning Commission is really interested in exploring this, not because you know that you have policy steps to take, but you want to understand this world for future use. So at a minimum, we are not perpetuating those negative aspects, and ideally down the line might lead to future policy discussions, but really earnestly approaching it as an educational opportunity at the outset. And so when we added that to our work plan, we also recognized that means there's probably a lot of perspectives that aren't here that would be valuable for us to figure out what that community conversation looks like and the aspects of it. Again, I don't know that we'll have all the answers here, but I'd love to just at least take a few moments to hear what your ideas are. Maybe there's other boards or commissions that you think would be valuable to connect with, to partner with. Do you have any preliminary thoughts on how this might look?
Commissioner Milstein.
My first initial thought was to see if Professor Steinberg or Goodspeed would be willing to serve on this. I think with the work that they're doing, I think it'd be great to get their perspective on it. The other sort of areas that I think we should cover is maybe getting some representation from like the Bryant Community Center, from the Ann Arbor Community Center on Main. Is it Ann Arbor Community Center? Is that the name of that organization? But like looking at some of the community centers that are in town and getting some representation from them, I think that would be super helpful just to get their perspective into things.
Commissioner Clark.
I've been reading up a lot about this work that they've been doing, especially in Austin and Minneapolis and Boston area, and it's been quite interesting just reading up the way that they've kind of formulated the process. And I think that Ann Arbor could maybe partner with the organizations like Commissioner Milstein said, as well as there's a lot of room for like bringing forth, I guess, public engagement surrounding this. And yeah, and just make sure those communications are all out in the open. Maybe I can send something to the group about, you know, the best practices I've already kind of put together. And yeah.
Yeah, to that point, we talked a little bit about the website and the working session and some other resources. I would generally say if there are other resources that you think would be of benefit to your colleagues, to the community, let us know. We can figure out, which of those may make sense to really just promote and link and help it at least start establishing the trail for folks to do the similar exploration like you're doing.
Commissioner Milstein, you had a hand up, and then Commissioner Dish.
I'm actually good. Thank you.
I think there's a lot of community expertise around this. And so I would not necessarily want all of them to be on the committee, but I would love to just have a meeting where we picked the brains of people like Jess Letaw, who's done a lot of community education on this. And she might have some names for people who could come speak. And also want to make sure that I think we need to talk about what the format of sort of the public of forums that we might have would be. And I think that in contrast to the job that OSI did around the A20 plan, where they knew where they were going and there's science that tells them how to do it. And so it was very much educative. I think that this is really conversational. This is about airing the sides of the debate, because there are lots of sides of this debate. And so I would like to make sure that we represent, that we try to really construct conversations that get to the meat of what are the resistances. What are the values that are genuine values that hold people back from the kinds of change that we are seeing in places like Minneapolis, say, for example. And so that it isn't about educating people to accept the course of action that we have chosen, which is really what the A20 plan was, and rightfully so. But that it's really a chance for this community to talk about what it envisions, what it fears, what it wants. And that's my vision for this. And I'm always open to being corrected, persuaded out of my place, whatever.
Commissioner Lee.
I know we're talking structurally about how that single family zoning or the community conversation is going to kind of what that will look like. There's just two comments I have. The first one is as far as my actual volunteering for the ZBA thing. I actually think that it may be not the best thing. I think there's going to be a lot of people are going to say you got a lot of conflicts with. I mean, they said I had conflicts for here, so I just have some concerns. Again, I'm going to still stick with master plan review and transportation commission. But I mean, if people want me to serve on it, I certainly will. But I just wanted to kind of voice that as I may see that as opposition from that standpoint. And then the second thing, just because I won't be necessarily a part of that committee of the single family zoning, I got 30 seconds very quickly. I wrote a paper that's it's a relationship between community efficacy and high rises, because I grew up in high rises in Korea. So I was always interested, are people more friendly and more likely to borrow a cup of sugar in a high rise or in like a single family residential zone? We actually found that there was a negative correlation with high rises because of the lack of good public spaces. So people only interact at mailboxes and on elevator shafts when it's 30 stories or higher. So providing, when you talk about going from people's lawns, people talk on lawns, porches, things of that nature. So it was an interesting paper because, again, it was spurred by this high rise relative to community efficacy. And I realized I never knew any of the neighbors. I just knew the ones that were on the same floor that were like right across, and maybe the floor above and below. But, there wasn't this, when I moved to America, what I saw was, I was like, wow, why so many people know each other? And it's good public spaces that result in it. So good programming. So when we talk about duplexes, quadplexes, more density in these areas as they infill. Providing successful public spaces for interaction will be critical to maintaining community efficacy. So this idea of, can I go borrow a cup of sugar from somebody else? So that was my little spiel. I thought I was like, oh, you know what? That paper was really relevant to this discussion of creating density, because high rises are the ultimate density. Korea is demolishing 30 stories for 50. And so programming for successful public spaces is critical to maintain community efficacy. Sorry, completely off, sorry about that. So ZBA, I have a little bit of concern. I just thought to myself, it may be kind of a, I could see how people might be concerned, but I also think I just objectively have some, value to add. And the second thing was, I think the single family zoning has a lot of great discussions to be had. I agree with, partnering with those kind of communities, but then just also wanted to inject that answer. I'd be happy to send you the paper I wrote also, if anybody's interested. It's really long, not that good. Sorry.
So I think Commissioner Milstein, I saw his hand come up probably in response to the ZBA bit, since he has lots of history on ZBA.
Yes, 8 years of history on ZBA. So Commissioner Lee, there's no conflict. The majority of the work is residential, and a little bit of signs, like at commercial places, a little bit of that. So I don't see how you would be conflicted out of too many of the items. It's mostly residential work.
Okay, I rescind my comment. Thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Oh God, no, I forget what I was going to say. Oh, was it last time, our last working session, HRC members, I think, attended, and I mean, they might be a group that might be interested in, having a designee or two on this committee. Another thing I just want to throw out there, I don't know if there's any sort of budget for this, but I think we need to just start thinking about, especially as we're going out to community members to get their input, especially as it relates to equity. I think we need to look at compensation for that expertise. And it may be worth considering, like, do we need to hire some sort of get thoughts from like a racial equity advisor? I mean, we've been working with some, I've been working with one at work, and it's been really helpful in, like, I don't know, like having sounding boards for these conversations. Like, as we're forming this group, I just want to make sure that we're not unintentionally tone deaf. This is a really sensitive conversation, and I just want to make sure we're structuring it correctly and thinking about all kinds of different ways to approach it.
Thank you for bringing up HRC, because I know that they would be interested in having a couple members. If we're interested, they're already, I mean, this in my mind is kind of the affordable housing committee that, doesn't meet much anymore. Maybe it could be a model of that, where there's members from each. But I kind of want to go back to what the name is and what the purpose is, because I think that I'm hearing different things. And also think that the name is going to send a huge, like, it's those two things are intertwined. So the two things that I'm hearing, one is very much future oriented. Let's get input and feel what people want and need. Another one is, let's educate ourselves on how we got to this place and the inequities in zoning. And in my mind, like, to some extent, the concern over, like, the actual, like, single family zoning is that it names a particular place. It kind of presupposes what we're going to be doing. And I don't necessarily know that that was that was the intention behind it. I think it's, the words that I had written down on my book were inequity in zoning, or something of that mind. It's a little bit more specific than community conversation, Commissioner Dish, but the idea of a community conversation is helpful. At least at the initial stages, I would imagine that this is, let's get good information. Let's take what Commissioner Clark found, and make some places may be more action oriented, but there's a lot of research coming out of Boston and other places about, like, just understanding how the past perpetuates inequities now. And we need to educate ourselves to that. in my mind, this is helping formulate what we as planning commissioners, to be responsible commissioners, need to know to do our job, just like we want to learn about heat pumps, right? But also along the same lines, like making that available to the community. And I think that that may lead to action, but I honestly think that making sure that we're all working from the same facts, historical facts, and the links between that might help initially. And so it wouldn't be so much like, I think that where you were going, Commissioner Hammersmith, like in terms of who gets involved and who, like, and compensation for them makes a whole lot of sense, particularly as we're thinking about, you know, changes and solutions, and kind of, there was a lot of discussion about that. Some of that may be appropriate in the educational part, but I think maybe not. Or I don't know. I would just bring out that I'm hearing from different people on here a couple different things. And so maybe that their first job is to like figure out what it is. But before we ask other people to be on it, I think we maybe need to know what it is that we formulated. And I'll just add that I'm happy to be on it because this is something that I want to learn about myself. If it could not be between the hours of after work, if it could be like early or in the afternoon. Anyway, but that's, yeah. Or I can just join when I can. Commissioner Clark.
I was going to say, I've seen the work in like some other cities kind of referred to using things like, you know, examining local land use with a fair housing lens, or with an inclusive land use or equitable development history and future, or something like that. But I do think it makes sense to maybe broaden it, because I think that, you know, with zoning, there's so many components that kind of moving parts that we shouldn't really kind of start with what, you know, start with any presumptions.
Commissioner Dish.
Yeah, we were actually having a conversation about it earlier this afternoon, and I was thinking about a broader framing, just like equity and sustainability, that it's a community conversation around equity and sustainability, but through the lens that Planning Commission goes at it. But I think that I do not think that we want to call this single family zoning, because I think it's just an invitation to get a lot of really angry people. I mean, just because there's so much fear around single family zoning. And I mean absolutely no reflection on anyone by this. It's a hot button topic. And I think what we want to have is a broader conversation around the values that we have in common. And we do have value. We all hold values of sustainability and equity. And it will lead us into discussions of single family zoning for sure. But I don't know that that's the frame that we want for this. And I think words like land use, if we really want this to be a conversation beyond the people who are on this commission and who work in this sort of thing, land use is just not, it's just not a word for most people. And so, you know, I think with starting with the values and then thinking about how our built environment and our spaces absorb values that we no longer believe in, right? That's the big conversation that we want to have, that lots of people are interested in. Look at all the people who came to the discussion of racial covenants. And this is so much in the air, and lots of people want to talk about it. And so I think that the more we can frame it as an exploratory conversation rather than anything that's focused on anything we are about to do, I think the better off we are, and the more sort of in good faith conversation we can have. So yeah, I would like change the name of it. And yeah.
I remuted myself. Commissioner Clark, did you still want to have something to add to that? Your hand's still up.
Sorry.
To that point. Oh, go ahead.
I was trying to take it down. I'm sorry.
No problem. To that point, I would add that Professor Goodspeed followed up with me after the presentation last week, just to say like, hey, here's what's going on. And like, because we were talking about getting students looking at this stuff, right? And shared with me a paper that came out, and I don't remember what city it's looking at. Actually, it's from California, like kind of there's similar studies in Boston. The paper is called The Geography of Inequality: How Land Use Regulation Produces Segregation. The important thing in there is like it's all of land use regulation. Like it's not just like, is it only multifamily versus single family? It's like all of the things, and this is where all of our conversations are connected. All of the things that we do that make things more expensive price out some people, the people that may not have capital, right? And the reason that they don't have like capital is linked to historic inequalities too, right? So it's not just like how many units you can build on a particular lot. It's all of the other things. And so that's why I think having a discussion that's beyond like taking the, beyond specific zones and talking just about inequality in zoning or inequality in our neighborhoods, like however we want to call it. I think some of that is, pulling together what's been done other places and using, how are they measuring how unequal, my ideas are, how unequal, these places are in California. Like let's run our zoning ordinance through that test, just to anyway. So I would concur with that. To have the conversation and make it more educational and inclusive. Mr. Leonard, you've been making lots of faces as I've been talking.
That's just what I do. So
are we going way off of what, I think this is still true to what our master or our work plan says.
No, as I prefaced, I don't know that we'll solve it, but I'm trying to think where we go. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is I'm reluctant to call it sort of a project scope, but maybe the next step is to take the discussion that we've had here, some of the ideas and idea generation about the who, start adding some of it to what is happening perhaps in some other communities as models. And then I don't feel like I can present it back to you in a fully formed, this is what we should do. But I feel like I could pull some of this together and just package it to our next chapter of this conversation about, okay, now this is how some other communities are approaching it. This is how those might be similar to what we are envision here, or how they might be different. So I guess my instinct is to take any other input that you have on it, and then let me not solve it, but maybe just try to start organizing it a little bit, and then bring it back to you for a meeting or a working session, depending on how our agendas look, for the next ideation of it. Does that seem like an approach?
My question is, would you bring it back to us as a whole, or since we just formed a committee that's on this, we don't totally know what the thing is, but people know generally that they're interested in doing this. Would you want to bring it back to that subcommittee?
That's a great question. I originally envisioned that whatever that line was going to end up being the larger group, but that doesn't have to be that way. I could work with that group to maybe refine it a little bit further than what I'm talking about. I'm open to how the commission would like to approach that. Commissioner
Hammerschmidt.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in this topic, very much so. It could go two ways, maybe. This does seem like, the way Commissioner Mills framed it too, and remembering now our work plan, like this should be something that I think the entire commission benefits from and is involved in. And if there is a smaller subcommittee, maybe that is more on like the details of how this gets communicated and what, and like outreach to, people to come in and talk to us. But I personally would really appreciate if like a lot of this education was also brought back to us as a full commission in working sessions, et cetera.
Totally agreed. I'm thinking that the subcommittee helps vet before, helps shape what that looks like. And as you just said, the outreach plan, so that Mr. Leonard has somebody to bounce ideas off of You know, like, who should we bring in next to talk to us? Does
So is
that make sense?
that, I'm interested in this topic, like I'm adding you to that group?
Is there going to be extra meetings?
Yeah,
Is it going to be at 7 o'clock at night?
we haven't scheduled it yet, so it'll be
Yeah,
at the
add me.
will of the group.
Add me. Add me for now.
Okay. All right, so I think that's great.
Commissioner Clark, just a minute. Can you? Yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify if I was on that one or if we were at capacity on it or how many people were on it or whatnot.
You are on it,
Okay,
and it's I've got 4 people.
okay, cool. Thanks.
I've got Commissioner Clark, Commissioner Dish, Commissioner Hammerschmidt, and Commissioner Milstein. Commissioner Mills, you said that you were interested.
I am, but if that brings us to a quorum, I
Well,
will take it as a sign that I don't need to join another meeting. So,
It's gonna be noticed regardless, so you
okay,
could have 5.
you can add me onto it. Yeah. Thank you.
See, and that'll be another advocate for not another evening meeting.
Yeah. I mean, good luck finding time during the day, but still, like. All right. Everybody comfortable about where there are X's now on the tables where you are? Do we need to come up with a name for that committee? What do you have right now, Mr. Leonard? Inequity and zoning. Conversations about zoning. Oh,
Maybe that's the task of the group. Because I'd like to go to bed rather than debate what the name of it is for the next 20 minutes.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, good point. Okay. So we're good. So now we need to vote. Can we just do a hand vote? Okay, all in favor of those, all in favor of the table as amended, please raise your hand. Yes, that's everybody. Okay, great. Next up is public comment. This is the final opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about any item of interest. Public comment can be made by calling 877-853-5247 and then entering meeting ID 991-5161-1348. City staff will select callers that have raised their hands. You raise your hand by pressing *9 and we'll call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. As always, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Mr. Stollberg, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Interesting discussion on that last item. I'll make a comment on that. Be careful. There's definitely a group of people in town who would like to see the elimination of single-family zoning, and a group of people in town who fear that that first group has a lot of influence and is about to do that. So either way you go, you're running into a lot of emotions, a lot of at least imagined controversy before you even get started. So good luck to you with that. But I'll speak to you briefly as I developed single-family housing for a living for a while and transitioned into renovating older homes, a lot of them duplexes. The first home I bought in 1994 when I moved back to Ann Arbor was a triplex that I bought with 2 friends. And I worked with a lot of people to do, because I'm also a realtor, owner-occupied duplexes, which I love as a great way to get people into an equity building situation. And it really helps to make up for lesser incomes. I don't know if there's a polite way to say that, but I love owner-occupied duplexes as a way to get people who aren't making a lot of money into an equity building situation, and that would include the minorities who've been excluded for a long time. So I just throw that out as my 2 cents of ways to do things. I also had a condo conversion project. We bought an apartment building in converted into condos and deliberately aimed it at first-time buyers, lower price point. And it was very successful for, I'd say, the first 2/3, and then we ran into a thing called the Great Recession. But so it didn't economically work out well for us. But I'd really like to explore that idea too. I don't know how to do that publicly, but I really think the key focus on when we look at historic systemic, what racism in both lending and land use policies. I think the big important thing is to look at the equity opportunity that was denied minorities, and that if we're looking for you want to study the history, I get that, and that's very important.
30
but
more
if we're
seconds.
looking towards solutions and how to remedy that, I really believe that an ownership component is far more of an important focus than, say, zoning. My 2 cents. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Caller with a phone number ending with 556. Caller with a phone number ending with 556. You can unmute your phone and address the Planning Commission for 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Ralph McKee. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would echo the last point that Tom Stollberg made about the home ownership component, which obviously relates to whether you call it the single family zoning committee or have a more a broader name. And I think in this community, and particularly, I've been involved in dozens of pretty heated discussions about this topic over the last year, and many of them sort of ignore that component. And the fact is that one of the biggest historical factors is not which neighborhoods minorities were allowed into, but did they have the money to buy their own place? And for example, in the affordable housing, when that millage came up, the entire focus was on rental housing. Tom and I and some other people proposed at council to have some of the millage money set aside, which I still hope may happen. And that proposal was pretty much just blown off as not even, why even think about that, which to me is kind of crazy. The same thing goes for this discussion of single family or quadplex zoning, et cetera, and comparing, looking at the past is very good, and I think that's very important, but that's one piece of the puzzle, and it doesn't necessarily apply now in our circumstances. Yet, I've been in dozens of discussions where if you even defend single family zoning, you're immediately called racist in a very vicious way. And that's going to happen in these discussions, no matter what you call your committee. Eventually, you're going to get to that. And I would just want to stress that I hope people will have the fortitude to look at today's situation and not assume that the past equals the present. That's very important. Third item, I think when you're looking at the academic research or the comparisons to other places, again, you have to critically examine the
30 more seconds.
Situations. For example, Minneapolis, everybody says, well, that's great. Look what they're doing there. They have inclusionary zoning. Every single quadplex that replaces a single family house in Minneapolis has to have affordable units. We can't do that. So you can't assume, well, okay, building quadplexes in Minneapolis resulted in affordable housing. That won't work here. Just will not work. So you have to make the comparisons with critical thinking and not make any assumptions about anything without going down to the core of it, to the nitty-gritty. Thank you very much for listening. I hope these conversations will be productive.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else on the line, so I will move on to item number 13, which is commission proposed business. Is there any? Seeing none. Oh, was that a movement, Mr. Leonard? Okay. Getting your pen out. We'll move on to number 14, which is adjournment. Moved by Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Gibrandal. All in favor? Say aye or raise a hand. That is everyone. Have a great night. TGIF tomorrow.